All right, it is 5:30 on August 14th. We have a full dais. I'm not going to read the executive session because we're not going to go into executive session. So we are on item number 1. It's 5:30. I'm calling this meeting to order. Thank you, council. It's like we were just together not that long ago. I would like to bring your attention to the page 3 of 4, and we are going to call item number 4 citizen comments. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up for citizen comments?
No, Mayor.
We are now done with item number 4, and we only have 2 more to go. So we are going to kick off this work session with item 2A. There are some items that you have in front of you. I want to make sure everybody's got them. For if you are watching from home, there was a revised packet that came out at 4:12 p.m. So you'll want to make sure you've downloaded the revised packet, or you're going to see things online and it's not going to it may not match exactly what you're looking at. They've made some typo corrections and stuff, not substantial changes, just trying to keep everybody on the same page. Council, you have an Excel document of it's 3 or 4 pages, and it is how we are going to go through the action items. For those of you at home, as we go through this development review process, we are going to be addressing items 3A through 3M. So instead of going through the whole thing and then essentially having to go back through it all to make motions on the items, we'll talk about, for instance, what's involved in 3A, and then we will break away from item 2A, go to 3A, have the vote, have the discussion, go back to 2A. Is that making sense to you? You'll follow through on the with the Excel sheet. You also have the current City of Bastrop Development Manual. That is something that's been placed in front of you that will be referenced, we'll talk about. And you also have a Public Improvement Plan Agreement. So those are 3 additional paper items that you should have in front of you on the dais, in addition to the agenda. And then, of course, you'll be able to either watch on your iPad or up on the TV screens where we are in the packet. So, work session item 2A, receive briefing on the development review process and all changes necessary to comply with Texas Local Government Code Chapter 212 and 245 resulting from the 86th legislative session. City Manager.
Mayor and Council, I appreciate the grace that y'all have given us. We are literally still working on what all of this looks like. Tonight we will go through the briefing in hopes of approving the first reading of the ordinances, and please recognize that there will continue to be changes. They won't be substantial, but all of this is still going through the City Attorney's Office. And the important thing is that the ordinance that you finally adopt on the 27th is the permanent ordinance. So the fact that what you are approving by reading the caption tonight is not that it's not perfect.
And there are a number of ordinances.
Every one of them will be touched, yes, ma'am. So with that in mind, let's talk about this evening. We're going to break the agenda down into 3 components. The first is to review the changes required in the development process to comply with House Bill 3167, and in just a minute I'll talk about what that is. The second item we're going to address is item 3D, and that's going to be to review changes required to the fee schedule in order to comply with House Bill 852. As I discussed last night in the budget presentation, we have added new fees to cover services that we provide that are currently not in the fee schedule, and then modify existing fees in an effort to reach 75% cost recovery. Matt Jones will lead that presentation. Chief Ockdale is here to address any fees relative to public safety. Item number 3 is to review changes to the stormwater drainage ordinance, allowing appeals to come to council rather than the Board of Adjustments. As we were going through this process and reviewing all of our development ordinances, we realized that the storm drainage ordinance that you approved in April has its appeals process resting with the Board of Adjustments. For those of you that are familiar with Board of Adjustments, They are a quasi-judicial body. So if you didn't like the ruling that they made, the only option you have is to sue them in district court. The decisions that would be made have to do with waivers and exemptions, the very things y'all dealt with consistently through the moratorium and or truly elected to address. And so Trey is going to give you a overview of that in hopes that you'll amend the ordinance and have the appeals come to you rather than the Board of Adjustments, but we'll deal with that last. So with that, let's start with the changes to the development review process. So the goal of House Bill 3167, as it's been explained to me, had really two objectives, and that was to provide certainty to the development community and predictability. And it certainly will do that because it has removed any ability for anything other than a check-the-box process. So let's talk about some of the challenges with House Bill 3167. As I mentioned last night, the first thing that pains me greatly about this is that all cities are treated the same regardless of their size. So whether or not you are the size of Austin or Houston, Dallas or San Antonio with a large staff that can focus their energies on a very small part of the process, we're all treated the same. So Bastrop, Elgin, Smithfield, Lockhart, Giddings, all of us that have small staffs and in some instances may only have somebody that does this part-time, the rules don't change. When that application walks through the door, you've got 30 days to deal with it or it's deemed approved. So this is burdensome, truly, for small cities. So there are really three important key elements to House Bill 3167 that I want to reference at this point that kind of puts tonight's meeting into perspective. The first one is it goes into effect September 1st, 2019. So hence why we are doing a workshop and asking you to approve something on the same night. It will, obviously, all of these will be adopted by August 27th and meet that September 1st deadline. The second thing is that all plans or plats that are subject to the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 211 and 212, must be approved, disapproved, or approved with conditions within 30 days by the municipal authority or it's deemed approved.
And that's 30 calendar days, correct?
That
Not
is 30
working days.
That's right, 30 calendar days, yes ma'am. And that includes weekends and holidays. Number three is in a legal action. And this one really, I think, is troublesome. In a legal action challenging a disapproval of a plan or a plat under Chapters 211 or 212, the municipality has the burden of providing clear and convincing evidence that the disapproval meets the requirements of Chapter 211 and 212 or any applicable law. So the reason that you have all of the ordinances before you is we've had to go through our process at infinite detail and see if we could find where you gave us the authority to do it. And if you didn't, it's been added tonight. So when I say bureaucracy, it's at its finest. If we require a plat note of a scale is 1 inch to 100 feet, it better be in the ordinance or we cannot require it. So this, if people are looking for government bureaucracy, look no farther than right here. So let's break this down just a little bit. So in order to comply with the September 1st, 2019 deadline, you have to approve multiple ordinances with 2 readings. And so you will achieve that. But it's important for you to appreciate that Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a special meeting prior to your August 27th agenda to offer recommendations on the zoning ordinance. That's a requirement of state law. I do want it noted that all of these items are posted for a public hearing. And the reason that I did that is the 3 of us have handled this agenda individually. And I wasn't sure what needed public hearing or not, so I put public hearings in here, and he posted the public hearing notices that required it. So we're covered. So that's why everything has a public notice that doesn't, a public hearing that doesn't have to have it. The next item is all plans or plats subject to the Texas Local Government Code, as I said, have to be approved, disapproved within 30 days by the municipal authority or it's deemed approved. So let's talk about what is a plan. A plan is defined as a subdivision development plan, a subdivision plan, subdivision construction plan, site plan, land development application, and a site development plan. We use the vernacular public improvement plan. And the reason for that is in our B3 codes that you're going to be adopting in November, we have made an important distinction in our codes between public space and private space. So public improvements are the same thing as a subdivision construction plan. So our public improvement plan falls under this requirement. A plat is defined as a preliminary plat, general plat, final plat, and a replat. And when you read the rule book, any plat is a 30-day process, whether it's administratively approved by our Director of Planning and Development or it goes to P&Z. Municipal authority. Per the Texas Local Code Chapter 212.006 is the Municipal Planning Commission. And so once the submittal is deemed administratively completed and accepted, the Planning Commission or administrative authority must act within 30 days or it will be approved. Not reviewed, but act. And so it's important for us to note that we will no longer be offering comments to any of our development community. The process is going to be so clear and so precise, and we will cover it at the pre-development meeting, that when they turn in their submittal, we will do a completeness check. And when we deem it meets the intent of the rules you've set forth, it gets in the queue, it's reviewed by staff as the development review, and then it goes to planning and zoning. So this process is burdensome. So it's going to really require the development community statewide to up their game and make sure that their quality checks are in place.
See, manager, I have a question about that.
Yes.
There will no longer be a comment period. I know that sometimes, and I'm looking at the guys, sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth. Hey, we're thinking about doing this. Yeah, that would work kind of thing. So I think that's what, but we are still able to issue comments. Correct?
Yes, and I will tell you where we can, but
okay.
in a public improvement plan context, there's no comments because it requires the 30-day approval.
Okay.
But we'll get into where we are providing feedback. The third piece is, as I said in, let me make one more comment on 2. We have made the assumption based on the comments that y'all have made throughout the code reviews that plats will stop with planning and zoning. And the reason that we have assumed that is you are essentially putting all the rules and regulations in place through the adoption of these ordinances, and it is an administrative action. The law is very clear. If it meets all of the requirements you've decided as council, it has to be approved. So there's no point in it coming to you when de facto it's met that check mark. So plats will stop at P&Z. So let's talk about some other notable things to know about House Bill 3167. It says that the municipality must not establish a deadline for applicant to submit a response for a conditional approval or disapproval. It says municipalities that receive a response to a conditional approval or disapproval shall determine whether to approve or disapprove not later than the 15th day after the response was submitted. So that's an interesting rule. So when we get to our uniform submission dates, we have to find the meeting that would have approved this and count back 15 days, and that's now the due date. So it's intricate. Municipal authorities responsible for approving plats or the governing body of a municipality may not request or require an applicant to waive a deadline or other approval. So if we can't make it, we've lost the game. So as I mentioned to you last night, we are making some substantial changes operationally to how we will do business to make sure that we can comply with this process. And I'll talk more about this when we get to the schedules.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
On the 15 days, is that working days or is it just
calendar days?
Calendar days. So
15 days from the P&Z meeting, they will turn in the comments and we'll have to review them.
So that means there could be sometimes that it would be weekends and things like that, or
And holidays.
and holidays. Okay.
So that only shortens the time that we have to look at it. Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Linda, if on the 30-day notice, if the submission that is, or if they submit something that is deemed incomplete, does that initiate or stop the 30-day process?
So what will happen is, and we'll talk about it when we get to our submittal schedule, is that there will be dates throughout the year that we will actually accept submittals. So when you adopt the schedule, there will be only 12 days a year that we'll take plats. There'll be 12 days a year that we will take public improvement plans. There will be 12 days a year we take site plans. And essentially what we do then is we look at, say for instance, plats go to P&Z. So the P&Z meeting is the last Thursday of the month. So we count back 30 days to figure out, okay, in what time period could we get the plat submitted through? If it has to be posted for public notice, we had to factor in the Bastrop advertiser schedule into this. So what happens is that on the day that we have determined that we will accept applications that have the 30-day notice, the very next day a completeness check will occur within that 24-hour period. And we will determine whether or not it is deemed administratively complete. If it is administratively complete, it then goes on the agenda of the authority that is vested to approve it. If not, we will return it with their check and credit card and tell them, thank you very much, we'll see you next month. But we will not take anything that is not administratively complete. So that's going to frustrate some folks because they're never going to get beyond the counter of the P&Z window. But it is what it is.
And the other part of that, the legislation has taken away the ability, if they said, look, it's okay if we're going to be a little bit late, it's okay with us, developer could say, it's okay with me if it's another week late. We're not allowed to do that. We can't waive the date, is what you said.
There are waiver provisions that we may come back and institute, but trying to get all of this through that, today there is no waiver. You either submit it on this date or we don't take it.
But what it says is the municipality can't say, we're forcing you to waive a date.
We cannot. And if they want to waive it, I'm not going to take it. Because at this point in time,
it messes up the calendar.
Everything, that's right. And so let's talk about that from an impact of a small staff. Because that really is the problem with this rule. If we were Dallas and we were Austin and I had 50 or 60 people in development review, I'd have flexibility like that. But we literally, I have built a calendar, and every Wednesday in this building, we're not going to take appointments. For any of us involved in development review, there will be no appointments because it is a dedicated plan review day. That's the only way we can make this work. And we have staggered every week. We will get some submittal and run it through the process, and we need the day to be able to do what we need to do to review plans and get them done. So there isn't any play in our system because we still have a city to run, toilets still have to flush, agenda packets still have to get out, but now I got 4 days to do that, not 5. Because we've had to dedicate one entire day so everybody is on the same schedule so we can consistently talk about it holistically and not in silos, which is dangerous.
That also implies that if for some unforeseen reason, and I know we really haven't had problems with this, but it just brings home the importance of if you don't have a P&Z quorum, everything's approved.
That is exactly right. And so one of the things that I have mentioned to the mayor is we probably need to add some alternates to a P&Z meeting because it's scary.
Because people do go on vacation.
That's right.
And they do get sick, and there are incidents where folks just can't get here. So that's something we have to have 9 members, but it was my understanding that you had discussed with our city attorney, and we can add alternates without having to do a charter change. So I just wanted you guys to be thinking about that. We may have some additional alternates because if they don't have a quorum and can't have a meeting, everything on that agenda is automatically approved. Okay.
So some other notable things to know about House Bill 3167 is some replats require public hearings and a 15-day notice is required for publication. So Mayor Pro Tem, to pick up your analogy, we will take applications mostly on Monday. We will do our completeness check on Tuesday, and on Tuesday, that notice to the newspapers due by noon. So we have to prioritize the review based on what would need public hearing notification so staff can get it reviewed in the morning, see if it's going to make it in time to meet the Bastrop advertiser notice at noon to get it in the paper to be notified so we can get it approved by P&Z on that meeting. Did I mention bureaucracy? So, one of the things that has taken quite some time, as you can appreciate, is, as I mentioned last night, the legislature ends at the end of May. The governor has 20 days to either approve, veto something, or it just goes into effect. And so at the conclusion of that, the Texas Municipal League, the American Planning Association Texas chapter, and the Texas City Attorneys Association have all gathered together individually as their chapters and have provided perspective, if you will, on what to do with this. The city attorney and his team have spent quite a bit of time reviewing all of that information, and this is Alan's recommendation assimilated from all of that of the things that we should do. And it is this format that we utilize to bring you everything tonight, which is why Alan's name is on the staff reports, because this has been very much a joint effort between the city attorney's office, their staff, and our staff. So lots and lots of people involved in this. So the recommendation is that there will be a pre-application conference. You will see that as a pre-development meeting in your ordinances. It's important to define filed. So we are amending the subdivision ordinance and adding a definition of filed. You need a schedule of uniform submittal dates, and you have those in your packets, and we'll talk about them. You need to implement strict, methodical, a timely set of internal procedures, no flexibility and no more informality. And we have got that in spades. Checklist and standardization of forms. The checklists are actually built into your ordinances, and as we go through this tonight, I'm going to show you. This table is the checklist. We're literally pulling it out, and that checklist is assigned the ordinance section, an item that gives it its validity. So when the developer picks up a packet, they already know what the law is because we've told them the law. And we'll be going back in before the 27th, and in some areas, if it's a TCEQ provision, we're putting that in the checklist. So everybody will know where the authority comes from. There will be no guess. So we hope that helps with the process. Standardization of forms. Everything will have an application. Everything will have a checklist. And that's going to be the basis that we use for plan review. We'll talk about the Development Review Committee. I will be a part of that. We will meet every Thursday morning. I've got agenda scheduled through the end of December of 2020. I can tell you what will be on all of them. And we will go through, we will have a formal meeting. We will review every recommendation that goes to planning and zoning or anything that is administrative, whether it's the city engineer approving it or the director of planning and development, and ensure that we are consistent in the application of our approvals, that the technical aspects have been met, and if we are going to disapprove something, that we can indeed justify it, and we will write it and submit it as a part of the packet, and it will essentially become Defendant Exhibit A when we get sued. So we have really worked hard to make sure that we're checking all of the boxes. Some additional recommendations are to decouple studies. Avoid requiring engineer, traffic, drainage, or utility studies to be submitted with plats or plans. So you will see our processes take out the engineering. And that's very important because that's where the time is. That's where the need for detail and the comment sections you are referred to earlier, Mayor, that's where we need to engage with our development community. We need this to be a partnership. We need it done right. We need it done smart. So we pulled that out of the 30-day system so we can still work with the development community. No concurrent submittals. Require a system of sequential filings at certain intervals. And you'll see in the flow charts this evening that we have done that. Mandate all discretionary approvals from...
See, Manager, I'm completely lost on that. No concurrent submittals.
So, in other words, you wouldn't file your site plan with your infrastructure plan with your zoning plan. There's this process. You have to do A before you can get to B, and B before you can get to C, and C before you can get to D. Yes, ma'am. Welcome to our world.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So where do we put the, say, a TIA?
So we are going to suggest that we don't do TIAs because we are going to be adopting the grid network, and so we won't need it. What we do know is TxDOT requires it, and you can't intersect their right-of-way without a TIA to get a permit. So we are going to let TxDOT be in charge of the TIA, and we have that in the process, and I'll talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Mandate all discretionary approvals from the city, i.e. Rezoning, plan developments, variances, i.e. Be secured in advance of submittal of plans and plats, and the process does that.
City Manager, before you move on, we used an acronym, and not everybody in the audience knows that acronym. A TIA is a traffic impact analysis. And the reason that she's saying that it would not be required with the gridded streets, the way that you think about it is if you're doing subdivisions with loops and lollipops, you got to figure how many people you're coming and bringing out to one intersection. But when you have a grid system, it's very much like grocery lines, and everybody goes to whichever grocery line is shorter, and you know that that block's going to get you to the same street. It's when you see the traffic ahead of you and you think, oh, I'm going to have to wait to turn left on Pecan, I'm going to turn on Jefferson. That's why you don't have to, that's why she's saying you wouldn't require a TIA. Thank you. You're very welcome.
The recommendation is also to forbid the submittal of applications for a final plat until the infrastructure has been completed and accepted or fiscal security is posted. And our process has the final plat only after infrastructure has been completed. Make sure that a basis for denial is contained in the Code of Ordinances so that it can be cited, and we hope that we've gotten all of that. Planning and zoning staff is going through and reviewing all of the ordinances again, as is the planning attorneys in the city attorney's office, to make sure we haven't forgotten anything. Delegate approval authority to city staff when allowed by state law, and there are several changes. As I go through this, I'll explain that does that, because at this point in time it's strictly just technical review to make sure all the boxes are checked. Have forms and instructions for applicants who voluntarily opt to seek a waiver on their own initiative. That's the one thing in this that we've not done. When Alan...
Which is pretty much what I was asking you about
yeah.
earlier, and we just haven't got there yet.
That's right.
Okay.
And once we get through all of this and work with it, then we can determine when that will be appropriate. Be prepared with accurate cost data to prepare for necessary budget appropriations and adoptions of new fees to fund a more complex permitting process. Well, that's 3B on our agenda. Have a process for applicants to escrow the city sufficient funds to reimburse for actual out-of-pocket professional service fees related to applications. Said a different way, if we utilize our engineering firms, which we will do, and say we send a set of drainage plans to one of them and it costs $20,000, well, they will, this provision allows us to pass that $20,000 cost to the development community, and they just pay the bill for it. And that's not unusual. Other cities do that. So the fees that we're adopting allows that to be a pass-through cost. And that's part of, if we don't have the capacity to get it done in 30 days and it's required, you got to pay for it. You got to outsource. That's right. The next
question, will the applicant be made aware there's a possibility of that out-of-pocket cost for those outside services?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
The next item is how we'll go through the process. So we're going to review this 3 times tonight and appreciate that it's complex. And so let's think of it as that high-level overview, that 30,000 foot level. We've gone to MapQuest, and we're going to look at the map just to get a general idea of where we're going. That's going to be our first process. And then once we go through and we understand where we're going to drop down to the 10,000 foot level. And that's like printing the written directions in MapQuest on where we're going. We're going to get into a little more detail so it begins to make sense. I call it putting meat on the bones. And then third is that in the weeds overview. That's the 500-foot level. This is the handout the mayor referenced, the explanation of the development review changes. Consider that your playbook. I will go back through the process and I will, in a little more detail, tell you what's involved and piece together the ordinances, because in some instances, to make one change, we had to change 4 things. And so we'll deal with all 4 ordinances on that change at one time. And so hopefully that will make this make sense when we get through. So we've worked hard at taking something complex and simplifying it. So let's start with that high-level overview, that 30,000-foot roadmap, shall we?
I'm just glad we're not starting this at 10:30 last night, is
Oh.
my comment.
So the first thing that I want to walk us through is that development type dictates process. And it's important to know that there is not necessarily an immediacy that happens with the process. If I'm a single lot residential and I've decided I want to get it zoned to something, I can come down and go through the zoning process and then stop. I don't have to do anything. If I decide, well, you know, I might want to build that shed or I might want to build that garage and it's not platted and I don't have a lot of record, then I would have to come in and I would have to plat in order to pull a building permit. Now, as a part of that platting process, staff is going to ask, are there utilities available to your lot? And if the answer is yes, then you're done. You can move right on and get you a building permit. But if they're told, no, there aren't utilities, then you're going to have to go through the public improvement process so that we can work with you to make sure your utilities get installed. And then you can pull a building permit. If you are a single lot that is multifamily or commercial, you would have to have a piece of property that is appropriately zoned to allow multifamily or commercial application. That lot has to be platted. If public improvements are required, you'd have to go through the public improvement process. But we would also require a site plan prior to the issuance of a building permit, just to make sure that we know how the site's going to be configured with the multifamily buildings and how commercial is going to interact and what the fire lane looks like and all those kind of things. That's right. Residential subdivision, it comes through, and typically those in our history have been planned developments. Platting, that is the one thing that requires a preliminary plat. It's a very extensive process. It does require public improvements that we end up accepting, but it doesn't require a site plan. Mixed use development. In order to be mixed use, it has to be something other than single family. And you can see there's a pattern here. Site plans are only required for multifamily or commercial applications. So this is just kind of your cheat sheet on what process happens when. And this could take years. There's not anything that says you move from zoning straight into platting, straight into public improvements, straight into site plans. Your big developers will do that. But some of your small entrepreneurs, it may take them a couple of years to go through this process. So just know this is the process.
Well, and for clarity, some of the big developers, by the time they're pulling the permit, that can be over a long period of
Yes,
time
ma'am.
as well. They may
It
go
will
through
be.
some steps pretty quick, and then by the time they may do it in sections or whatever.
So let's start with the zoning process. The first step of the proposed zoning process would be a pre-development meeting. Once you complete that pre-development meeting with staff, you could file your application for zoning. You will be given a schedule of zoning uniform submission dates, and you'll have to submit on the date. If you miss the date, you can wait until the next date. We will conduct a completeness check, and if it's completed, it will go on the P&Z agenda for action.
Is there specified pre-development meeting dates?
Yes, ma'am.
And are they called out on the calendar as well?
No, the pre-development dates are going to be on Thursday afternoons on the DRC Weekly.
And so they're going to be just like they are now. Our next available pre-development meeting is blah, blah date.
So what will happen is there will be an application process that you'll have to fill out for pre-development, and as soon as they are submitted to us and deemed complete, then they will be put on the next available schedule for review. Okay. So let's talk about the preliminary platting process. Please note that everything above the line in black are sequential steps, and that means that you can't do one until you complete the previous one. So the first one is a pre-development meeting with staff. We will outline the process. This is the only place we will design by review. We fully anticipate with the new codes that we'll have developers that don't appreciate your commitment to fiscal sustainability and will be stunned at what they can do. So we will challenge the paradigms, encourage them to embrace the walkability aspects of our plan, and it's just an introduction to Bastrop. We'll spend time here talking about drainage. There's a conceptual drainage plan, which is required in the stormwater ordinance that will happen. So that's an important meeting. The next step is that preliminary drainage plan. Mayor, this is where we will pull the first piece of that engineering and get drainage right up front. Council said very clearly we're going to move drainage to the beginning of the process. We're not going to leave it to the end. So they're going to start with drainage right off the bat. Once the drainage plan is approved, then they will present an infrastructure plan, which is something that we're adding to the process. It's that bird's eye view, if you will. That's the beginning to lay out your subdivision, and we'll begin to evaluate connection points and system demands, those kinds of things. That also is an administrative approval. It is going to be a checklist, and we'll talk about that earlier, and you will have already established what they have to provide in order for that to be approved. Once step 1, step 2, and step 3 are completed, you can then move to steps 4 through 6, and they are concurrent because they are external requirements. The first one is TxDOT permitting. Once you have a drainage plan and an infrastructure plan, then you pretty much know the majority of what's going to happen in your subdivision. We're going to call that 30% completion of a set of plans. So now you can sit down with TxDOT, you can do the TIA, you can get all of the permits necessary to access their right-of-way. If you happen to be in the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Area, you need to go to the county and apply for a permit. You need to go through all of the steps necessary to meet their bureaucracy and have an approved permit before you come in to see us. And you also need to bring all of the temporary construction easements, because if you can't build it, we're not going to waste our time reviewing it. So essentially at this point in time, when all 6 steps are met, you are now eligible to submit a preliminary plat. All engineering elements have been removed from the platting process and are approved, and all permits that impact a plat have been acquired. So at this point in time, for the 30-day process, it's simply lines on a map. And that we can get through and review in 30 days. So the next process is entering the 30-day cycle for the preliminary plat. So you will submit your plat per the schedule. We'll conduct a completeness check. If it is completed, it will go on the P&Z Commission agenda. DRC will meet, review recommendations, and P&Z must take action within 30 days of acceptance, or it's deemed approved. So the next step in the process are the public improvement plans. So now you have a preliminary plat, and you're ready to start constructing public infrastructure. The first step will be to finalize a drainage plan and have it approved by the city attorney. So now city engineer, I'm sorry, yes, the attorney would do very good at the drainage.
Her face went, no, I'm not.
So once a final drainage plan has been approved by the city attorney, a public improvement plan application can then be filed, and it will follow the same process. There will be a submittal date, a completeness check will be conducted. If it meets the list, it will be scheduled for administrative action and calendared for DRC recommendations to the city engineer. The administrative action must occur within 30 days of acceptance, or it too is deemed approved. So once you have an approved public improvement plan.
City Manager, Councilmember Rogers?
Just so I understand, so the first process, you have 30 days for this process, and then another 30 days for that second process, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just want to make sure they weren't consecutive 30 days.
No, ma'am, that's right. It's complete one 30-day and then move into the next one. So at this point in time, you have an approved plat, you have an approved public improvement plan, and so now we're moving into the construction phase. So This document right here called the Public Improvement Plan Agreement, it's a draft that I have handed out for you. This is a template that, Matt, has the city attorney's office reviewed this, or they haven't? Yes, it has been reviewed. So this is ready for y'all to adopt. And so this will be only the second thing that you approve in this whole process. You will approve zoning, and then when we get ready to start constructing public infrastructure for the city of Bastrop, it will come to you, and it has to meet the standard requirements in this agreement. We'll talk about this more in just a little bit. So once the public improvement agreement is approved, then a pre-construction meeting can be held. Once that pre-construction meeting is held, then the city engineer will issue a notice to proceed. Construction then happens. Step 4 at the completion of that construction is a walkthrough. And typically what happens is in a walkthrough is a punch list is created. It's a list of all the things that still need to be completed before we are willing to accept your infrastructure. So we're going to do a walkthrough, we're going to create a punch list, and that punch list has to be completed. The next step will be for the letter from the developer's engineer. Well, let me say it this way. The developer's engineer will have to issue a letter of compliance that says the construction of these public improvements have been conducted in accordance to the approved plan. Then the city engineer will issue a letter that says he concurs. They were indeed built that way. And all of that then is attached to the final plat submittal, and at that point in time, it can then move to final plat. Final plat is submitted according to the plat schedule. It is conducted, has a completeness check.
Hang on, I have a question. The wheels are turning. And you can tell me if, I think this is 30,000 foot. In my mind, if they've already got a final plat, sometimes if they get part of the streets done, we'll start issuing building permits. This implies there's no final plat. You can't issue a building permit.
That is exactly right.
So they have to be completely done with all the construction.
There's a portion in that public improvement plan agreement that would allow council to authorize up to 10% of building permits to be released upon substantial completion. That would be streets, street lights, water, sewer, and I think that's it. So if they're like still lacking hardscape, landscape, things like that, but it's functioning as a part of that public improvement plan agreement that comes to council for approval, you can authorize up to 10% release of building permits at substantial completion.
And the reason for doing that is they want to start building model homes.
Yeah, I was going to say that's model homes, and you can sell a few homes besides their models, because like I'm thinking of 200 lots or 200.
Right, but at that point, and that's only authorized when it's at that substantial completion, which would be streets, and then stormwater and drainage.
And this
sewer.
public improvement plan agreement can be a development that is asking for no variances and completely in compliance with all of our regulations. They would still have to do this agreement.
Yes, because that's what outlines maintenance bonds, open space management, drainage management, things like
And
that.
we'll talk about that.
And sureties and
But
stuff like
I'm just,
that.
in my mind, I'm thinking, ooh, they're going to have a lot more skin in the game before they can pull their first building permit.
Yes, ma'am, a lot.
Yeah, okay.
So it's important to note that once you get to the final plat, that in order for you to submit for a final plat, we have in all instances deemed the infrastructure complete and ready for acceptance. So by virtue of the adoption of a final plat, the infrastructure is deemed accepted by the city. That is different than bringing the plat to you and asking you to do it, because it's another 30 days that we then have to calendar and put here that gets us nothing, because it either is complete and accepted or it hasn't. So it's a check the box moment. So at the final plat, it's deemed accepted, and this is a 30-day approval process mandated. So the next item is the site plan process. And remember, site plans deal with multifamily and commercial developments, and so it's a fairly easy process.
Can they sell the lots if there's no final plat filed?
No.
So I understand that what you're proposing is they can build a few model homes, but there can be no real estate transaction because they don't have a final plat, so you can't get a title.
I don't know contractually how that works, but in my previous experience, the developer is required to deliver a certain amount. So if they have that PIP agreement in place that says we will release X amount of lots, then they'll put that contractually with their builder, where the developer has to substantially complete in order to fulfill some model homes that then can then start construction through their agreement. So
I'm
it
just
would
thinking
be,
if it's 200, they're not going to build 20 models, they're going to build 3 or 4, then
Yes.
any house that you can't sell it till you have the final plat.
no, that would be correct.
Okay, I'm
So
trying to make
what
sure I
that means is
understand
they
the
better
question.
have their act together
Yeah,
like we do.
Yeah, I'm not arguing, I'm just trying to be prepared to answer questions. I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting it in my mind. Okay.
And the great thing is that there's however many cities in this state that will be treating them all the same if they're following their city attorney's recommendations. The site plan is, again, an administrative action. You will be adopting the checklist, and it goes through the submittal date, the completeness check, and its administrative action. So at this point in time in the process, property is appropriately zoned, property has approved final plat, infrastructure has been accepted by the city, your site plan is approved, and the development process is complete. Property is now ready for vertical construction. So you will move over to the building inspection side of our process. So let's talk about the handy dandy little schedule of uniform submittal dates. So in your packet, there is a plat and site plan schedule of uniform submittal dates that start in September of 2019 and go through the end of next year. There is a uniform schedule of uniform submittals for zoning. There is one for public improvement plans, and the reason for that is we have to schedule the workload throughout the month so we can make all of these 30-day increments work. With the exception of a couple of dates in November and December, we will accept building permits on Monday. Building plans, development plans on Monday. That let me say it this way. We will accept development plans on Mondays, and we are pledging to get them through the process in 14 days. So by doing this with a Wednesday dedicated to plan review, we actually think we can improve customer service and be consistent in their applications. So without boring you with some really intricate calendars, I have color-coordinated calendars by month for every one of these functions, what day, what agenda it has to go to, who's going to see it, on what day, so that we don't miss anything, because if we do, it's deemed approved. So this is a new addition to your process.
So that, to me, that really helps explain why we have 3A, because in the past, if it's November or December, the planning and zoning would be, do we have something, let's just move it up a week, and we would be flexible based on what was on the calendar. We have lost all flexibility, so we have to say exactly that, because your calendar falls apart without it. Is that correct?
That is exactly right, ma'am.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers had a question.
I was just curious, on your calendar, majority of the days from the plan submission to the all submissions, there's a day, giving you 24 hours to look at it, but some days are exactly the same day. Is there a reason?
Yes, ma'am, because that would be Memorial Day, Labor Day, the Texas Independence Day is on a
Okay, I just
Monday,
wanted to make
Martin
sure.
Luther King.
Okay.
I had to go month by month.
All right, I just
And
wanted to make sure it wasn't.
The
just
first
something-
calendar she showed me, she said, so we're going to collect things on September 2nd. I said, Linda, that's Labor Day. And she went, oh. So, I mean, they've literally looked
just
at
trying to make sure
every
something-
month.
Thank you
Yeah.
for thinking above it.
Yeah.
Yes, and the other thing that complicates this is that P&Z meets on the last Thursday, not the fourth Thursday, but the last one. Some months have 5 Thursdays, some months have 4 Thursdays, and so it has been a nightmare to make all of this work, but we got it figured out.
And then to also not require P&Z to meet on Thanksgiving.
Right.
You know, because that's a ridiculous request as well. But if you don't have the meeting scheduled, then it's automatically approved. So there is no flexibility.
So the next part of the process that you will be adding is the public improvement plan agreement that Matt just covered, and we'll talk about in more detail at that next level. But that's a new something that you'll be adopting. The development manual, and what you have here is the last one that was adopted back in 2015. And I have provided it to you as nothing more than a model, so you can appreciate the applications and the level of detail. Well, all of this stuff to make this is in the ordinances you're adopting tonight. So we couldn't very well put it together because we don't have it. But this is what it will look like with our stuff in it on the 27th. So this is just an example of when I say development manual, that's the cover for it. It's already been designed. And we will tailor this to the process that y'all are adopting. But you are adopting an ordinance tonight acknowledging that there will be a development manual dated August 27th that will be updated, that will be the Bible for developers, that will be available online for them to have what they need to be successful through our process.
But we should spend very little time reading
None.
this because none of it is
That's
applicable
right.
anymore.
It was just in the event somebody said, what's a development manual and what's
And
in it?
did we ever have one, and
Yep.
what did it look like?
That's it. Okay. So that completes the 30,000 foot level. Let's drop down a little bit and move down to the 10,000 foot level with the written directions. So I won't cover this process again, but just know that this is development type dictates process. So step 1 for the process of zoning. Now there's going to be a mandatory pre-development meeting for zoning, and it's going to require a complete application and appointments with zoning staff. It's going to provide, we're going to need a sketch drawing of the lot, block, and street layout. We're going to discuss land uses and fiscal sustainability, and at that point in time, feedback will come from staff. Now, the reason we're having to do this is right now our ordinance requires a site plan with zoning. And you can't get zoning through P&Z in 30 days. And staff do their job and post it for public notice. It just doesn't work. So we've had to decouple, that word of decoupling the process. So now what we're doing is getting the information we need just for the zoning aspects of this. And we're going to deal with that and then require the site plan at the end. So this is the beginning of it had to be different to work. So once you complete step 1, then you can go through a zoning submittal, and that's in accordance to the zoning uniform schedule of submittal dates. We do the review for administrative compliance. If it's complete, it goes on to the P&Z Commission agenda that day. We already know they have to deal with it. So that's its internal resting place is we keep a draft agenda moving, and it just goes on the agenda. If it's incomplete, then the submittal is rejected, we return it, and they try another day. With
Another specific day.
a specific day on the calendar. There will be 12 of them in a year, yes ma'am. Planning and Zoning Commission will conduct a public hearing, and they will recommend approval or denial to City Council, and then it will be calendared for you to also conduct a public hearing and approve or deny the zoning request. So the preliminary plat, there's an optional step and then a mandatory step. Because of the drainage requirements that we have in our stormwater drainage ordinance and our process, We recognize that we have some folks that may fall under the requirements of this ordinance that don't believe they're developers. But we know that when you subdivide and you meet the threshold for subdividing property, whether you think you are a developer or not, you are one. So we have provided an optional pre-submittal meeting for subdivisions for them to come in and meet with our planner on duty. And there will be a schedule every day, and staff will be assigned a day to man the desk so that there's quality, consistent information coming out of planning. So they will be able to meet with the planner on duty, walk through the process, and get an understanding of the vernacular and the expectations before they ever spend any money, because they're going to have to spend some money.
And for clarity, it is my understanding that they are not required to prove that they own a piece of property to have this discussion. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know why it would matter.
So the point being, it could be, I'm thinking about buying this lot and I'm thinking about doing this with it. So you can sit down and they can totally have all the information they
Yes,
need
ma'am.
before they purchase the property and have an understanding of what's involved in that.
We would encourage that.
Yeah, Matt was saying you can kick the tires before you buy the car, and that's essentially what this meeting is. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And then to get into the platting process, there is the mandatory pre-development meeting. It requires a completed application and an appointment. All of that will be online, and you're going to have to walk in the door having spent some money. You're going to have a sketch drawing of your lot and block. You're going to have a concept drainage plan in order to move forward. This is a change for some folks who are used to just, that's the way we've always done it, or we'll do it on the back of a napkin. But if we're going to make drainage a priority, we start the conversation with quality drainage information.
Ma'am,
Yes.
do we have a definition of sketch drawing?
Yes, sir, you will be adopting one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The concept drainage plan is already included in your stormwater master plan ordinance and technical manual, and it comes with its own checklist. At this meeting, we'll discuss land uses, fiscal sustainability, and when you leave, we will have comments from staff within 5 days that provide a roadmap. Why 5 days? Our meetings are Thursday afternoon, and that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and maybe Tuesday if Monday's a holiday. So we had to do 5 days in order to make the schedule work. So I know people think, well, how come you can't do it in 24 hours? Well, some days we're not here on Monday, some days we're not here on Friday. So our commitment is 5 days.
Within 5.
That's right, we'll get it to you. The next part of the preliminary plat process is the sequential process that removes the engineering elements. This is you must get a preliminary drainage plan before you can move to step 3. And the stormwater drainage manual that you adopted in April as a part of our technical manual comes with checklist, and a preliminary drainage plan already has the checklist. We are going to require a geotechnical report. The mayor is way more qualified to answer any questions on this than I do if you have them, but essentially that geotechnical report explains the soil conditions that are critical for designing your drainage and critical for designing your infrastructure, i.e. your streets, how you will bury the dirt around your utilities. So these are critical components to getting it right. And the whole point of us building this infrastructure in a fiscally sustainable environment is to ensure that it will last at least its expected useful life. And wouldn't it be better if we got more gooey out of it than it needed because we did our job up front? This preliminary drainage plan shall be submitted and approved by the city engineer before going to step 3. The infrastructure plan is a new step. Also comes with its own checklist. And it's that bird's eye view of the proposed infrastructure improvements and how the infrastructure will connect to existing infrastructure. It's reviewed by the city engineer, Public Works, Parks Department for the public space, the open realm, water and wastewater, where are the utilities? Fire is interested in it from how they're going to fight fires. Curtis Irvin is seriously interested in where his electric lines are. So this is when we sit down and begin to really understand what is it you're trying to accomplish and how can we work together with the existing infrastructure and make this work. It shall be submitted and approved by the city engineer before going to steps 4 through 6.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do either one of these steps have a time limit, like how long the engineer has to approve it, or, you know?
No, and we did not want to put time limits on it because this is where we can comment.
I was just making sure we didn't have time restrictions from the.
No, ma'am. We have taken the engineering out because if it's not complex, it can go quick. If it's something complex, it'll take some time. But this is the part of the process where we're going to offer comments, go back and forth, negotiate what we can and cannot do, and make their
She's just
development
making
work.
sure, I think part of the question was there wasn't a legislative.
Yes, ma'am.
Force
No
of us.
legislative process here. The next step is I went the wrong way on my chart, is the concurrent processes, and these are the external processes that are outside the city control. So if it's not permits required for the use of their right-of-way for sidewalks, driveways, you have to go work with TxDOT, you have to do that TIA, that traffic impact analysis, and you have to bring a copy of the permit as a part of the preliminary plat application. The plat application will ask the question, is a TxDOT permit needed? If it isn't, you check the box no, and move on to step 5. Step 5 is the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Permit. This is its own brand of joy, and it comes from the county. And it also will be a box that is checked if you don't need it on the application. Temporary construction easements. If there's anything that has to happen off-site for the infrastructure that you're building to be connected to our infrastructure somewhere, all of those easements have to be identified and obtained in order for us to accept your plat. You're
ahead on.
Am I?
Yeah, now you're lined up.
No, I'm way off.
Yeah, okay, now you put.
Now I'm lined up.
There you are.
Yep. Okay, so Councilmember Rogers, this is where the 30-day process kicks in on this part right here. And that is the submittal of the preliminary plat. The application is taken with all of the attachments, i.e. you're bringing in a signed copy of that drainage plan, you're bringing in that 30% complete infrastructure, so when we're looking at the plat, we have all of the information to check back and say, yep, that plat meets all of the requirements of everything that's been approved, check mark. That will be a part of the administrative compliance review. If it's complete, it goes to the P&Z agenda and works through DRC, and then 30 days from submittal, P&Z considers it. Now, I will tell you on the schedule of uniform submittal dates, everything is within 24 days. So we have built the schedule where some are 23 days, some are 24 days. So if we had a situation where it wasn't approved because we couldn't make a quorum, we got 72 hours built into that bad boy to absolutely have a meeting. So I didn't push it to the wire. So this is a short-changed process, but we can meet the 30-day schedule with our calendars. Moving into the public improvement plan, now that we are zoned and platted, step 1 is the final drainage plan. Again, that's a requirement of the stormwater drainage manual. The checklist is required and provided. It requires a copy of that geotechnical report that they've done, and the city engineer has to approve this before they can then file the public improvement plan. This piece right here is subject to the 30-day approval process. So once all of the required steps are met, a completed PIP application can be submitted according to the scheduled date. We review for compliance. If it is deemed administratively complete, it goes on the Development Review Committee agenda for processing. Did you have a question? Oh, yes. I'll let you put that. There you go. The city engineer is the administrative authority for approval because it's just nothing more than a technical review. DRC will review, as I said, all of the 30-day requirements to make sure that we are consistent. That's the checks and balances in the system. As my mother said, she trusted me, but she always verified that I was where I said I was. So DRC is that trust but verify portion of this process. And then the city engineer will take appropriate action at that time. The step is the construction of the approved public improvement plan, and we've talked about the fact that this development or this public improvement plan agreement will come to you prior to scheduling the pre-con meeting. It will talk about the development improvement cost. It has quite a bit of information that we'll talk about when we get in the weeds. Once the PIP agreement is approved, there's a mandatory meeting scheduled by the city engineer. Everybody comes together, the developer, their contractors, our group, and this is where the rules of engagement are defined, where we review schedules. We talk about inspections, what the process is going to look like, what they can and cannot do, what's going to happen to them if they don't follow the rules, those kinds of things. And then there will be a notice to proceed issued in writing by the city engineer. And in writing is important. It irritates me hugely. Well, so-and-so said something. If it ain't in writing, it's not a fact. So this is a very formal process that every I will be dotted, every T will be crossed, nobody will be confused. The walkthrough and punch list is with the city engineer and the developer's representative. That punch list will be created and completed. At that point in time, there will be a requirement for the 2-year maintenance bond to be filed in accordance with this very public improvement plan agreement that you as council will adopt. And essentially what they're doing is ensuring that their infrastructure will last for 2 years. In that time period, we will monitor it. If there are issues, we will expect them to be fixed. And prior to the expiration, we will go back through and do another walkthrough. We will create another punch list, and we will make them come back in and fix it all in that 2-year time period. Again, the end game for us is fiscal sustainability. The certification process is the developer's engineer will issue a letter of compliance, and our city engineer must issue a letter of concurrence. And then the final plat process is they have to have a preliminary plat that's valid. And there is an expiration date of 2 years that if you have a preliminary plat and nothing has happened relative to the final plat in 2 years, it expires. So it has to be valid. There are provisions that if they've started working on it, that we have some latitude to work with them. And then all the public infrastructure must be built, and that letter of concurrence must be issued by the city engineer. So we're now back to the final plat process that requires the 30-day approval process. So once all of the steps are required for the completed final plat application, they can submit on one of the designated dates on the schedule. We again review for administrative compliance. If it's complete, it goes on the P&Z Commission agenda. If it's not, it's rejected. P&Z has 30 days to take action or it's approved. And when the final plat is accepted and approved by P&Z, infrastructure is deemed accepted by the city of Bastrop. The last step in this process is the site plan. And in order for you to get a site plan, the property must be appropriately zoned. The property must be platted unless it is a lot of record. All public improvements must be constructed and accepted if required. And note that only multifamily and commercial developments require a site plan.
Okay, the way I read that is if it's a lot of record, it doesn't have to be platted
It's, we don't require lots of
for a
record.
site plan. I'm just confirming that's how I'm reading it, and that's what we intended
We treat lots of record as if they're platted.
for the site plan.
According
Okay.
to your regulations. We have treated lot of record as the sacred cow.
Yes.
We've tried that several times and y'all don't seem to be
Does not go
interested.
well.
That's
Does not
right.
go
So
well.
we didn't bring it up again.
Okay. Well, that's why I was surprised that staff wasn't like saying this would be the time. So I was just
There's just so
making
much
sure
head
we're on the
gnashing I'm
same
willing to
page.
do today, ma'am, and that's not where we're going to start. So the submission process for the 30 days, and I'm sorry, the heading on this says final plat, but it should say site plan submittal, is once all of the requirements of the site plan are met, they can file according to the plat and site plan schedule, uniform schedule, submittal dates. It's reviewed for administrative compliance. It goes on the development review agenda, and this is really an administrative act, just checking the box for technical review. So the Director of Planning and Development provides the 30-day administrative action. So at this point in the process, again, the property is appropriately zoned. The property has an approved final plat. Infrastructure has been accepted by the city. Your site plan is approved if you're multifamily or commercial, and the development process is complete. You can now move to the other side of our process, and you are now ready for vertical construction. So, the schedule of uniform submittal dates. Again, you must adopt schedules of uniform submittal dates for plats, site plans, public improvement plans, and zoning in order to meet state law and internal capacity. So 3 of the 4 are required, but we have put a schedule for zoning because we have to make sure we can deal with our administrative reviews with the rest of the processes. So it just required everything to have a schedule. This also is going to require you to change the P&Z Commission meetings language in the zoning ordinance to meet the schedule. So essentially what the ordinance will say is that meetings January through October will be the last Thursday of the month. Meetings in November and December will be the last Thursday prior to Thanksgiving and the last Thursday prior to Christmas. So that essentially means P&Z will meet in the middle of November and December, and will do so prior to the holidays. And we have made sure that our acceptance of that gets us in and out before the holidays. That's not only problematic for P&Z, but it's problematic for staff. We don't have a lot of staff, and this is going to require us to coordinate vacations extraordinarily well. Well, at Thanksgiving and Christmas, half of us are gone, and you can't get the process through. So we've stopped the process in the month of November and December, and there's just some time we won't be accepting permits. We can't give them the justice they deserve, and we've just planned accordingly. So nobody's confused when we will and won't be taking development processes. The other aspect of the proposed improvement plan agreement is that you're going to adopt a standardized public improvement plan that will cover development requirements for construction of public infrastructure to be accepted. And this is going to have assurance of the infrastructure. So it's been interesting through this process. I haven't done this type of development review since the early to mid 90s, very early in my career when I was planning manager. So I've had to go back in my hind brain a long time. I work with a crew of youngsters that are post the savings and loan debacle. And so they don't appreciate the fact that subdivisions do go defunct in the middle of construction. And you do get left holding the bag. And you do get to clean this up. So it's been quite interesting for me going, no, I've lived through this. I've got enough wisdom and gray hair under this blonde to know these public improvement plans are important. So that assurance of infrastructure construction is if they were to go belly up, we'd have what we need to make sure that subdivision could be built. So that's very important. This is where the impact fees get paid, and this is what Matt came to the podium last night when we were talking about impact fees. This is a new place in our process where the impact fees will be not necessarily paid, but assessed at this point.
So I'm going to ask you questions when we get there because we're not in the weeds yet.
That's right.
Aren't you proud of
I am.
But it's on page 10 when we get there.
It will have a certificate of insurance naming the city of Bastrop as an additional insured and all of the maintenance bonds and requirements. So this is an extraordinarily important document, hence why it comes to you, hence why it has to be done before we step out of the gate to do anything. The next item is the proposed development manual. This manual is going to provide an overview of the development process by category: zoning, plating, public improvements, site plans, and building permits. It will have general information such as contact information and the schedules of uniform submittal dates, development links to all of our technical manuals, our development code. It's just the how to do development in Bastrop Primer 101.
Okay, City Manager, before we get in the weeds, I want to make a comment, and I also promised council, we've been sitting here for almost an hour and a half. We're going to take a quick break to get up and walk around for a couple minutes. But I had been talking about, we knew that we are replacing our development regulations. And we had talked about we're doing a little bit of a Band-Aid because we're going to be immediately replacing some of our codes with our new codes. But we are not going to be replacing this process. So there is a bunch of this that stays. It's your last slide that talked about general information, the development links to the technical manuals and stuff. That's the stuff that's going to change when we adopt the new codes in November.
No, we have worked with Matt Lewis, and probably 98% of this will be incorporated in our new stuff. There's no wiggle room. And regardless of what you adopt, the process doesn't change.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're saying the same thing, but I think we're coming from different
So the
angles.
development, the zoning ordinance that you're adopting is absolutely as it's been worked through the entire time. None of that is changing. It is how easy you get through the process with us that's changed.
Yes, so there are when we talk about having this first reading tonight and the second reading in 2 weeks, it does not mean that there are not still things that we are going to approve in October.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
So that there are some other changes that we've been working on that still have to change. This is specifically about the process. This is specifically to meet 3167, and that is not going to change because 3167 is not going to go away.
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
So we're kind of changing the tire while we're driving the car, while we're changing the road that we're driving. We got a lot of things changing at the same time, but the process that you've described, even though the underlying links, the technical manuals, is something that we're not voting on this meeting or next meeting, when you need to go look at that manual and how you go through the process of it, that part we are voting on, the process itself.
You are voting on the process and the technical manuals we use today, so we can be in compliance in September.
Then in October.
So in October, when you adopt the B3 codes, you will adopt the technical manual for the B3 codes that probably 80% of the technical manual is what you're adopting tonight. What is not in this manual this evening is the street detail for the 12 different street types that are being discussed. So that will have to be added. So there will be some overlay. Some overlay that we'll have to work through, but regardless of whether you build under the new codes or the old codes, our manhole box is going to be the same. And so some of the technical manuals, the tech manual you're adopting tonight is the design for constructing a manhole. It is the street sign we're going to put outside. It is the connection to the fire hydrant. That's not going to change in the code. So when I tell you y'all are adopting the weeds, I'm not kidding. We
just
are
want to,
seriously in the weeds.
We've worked so hard on all these development codes and the code rodeos and said that we'll be done. I don't want anyone to think that we have stepped in and we're not going to follow through with what we said we were doing and get that feedback and adopt codes
ma'am.
that are appropriate. I'm just, it's two, the two different rails on a train track.
So there's really three. So the development process we've been doing with the building Bastrop block codes is the zoning and the sign piece. All of the public input, all of the time and energy that we've spent on that is exactly what you're going to get in October and November. That has nothing to do with 3167. The second train that we're running right now is the International Code Council, Fire Code, Building Code, all of that the international, that the Construction Standards Board is reviewing. They are impacted by a rule we're not talking about that has the material applications of whether or not we can choose locally. So you'll have to deal with that piece of the legislature when you adopt those codes in November. And
Which is not what we're talking about right now.
That's right, which is not what we're talking about. And then the third piece of that is the technical words on a page that make sure what you've said you wanted zoned gets built to look like what you said you wanted it to look like. So that's when we take the pretty words and the pictures and we put the technical detail to it so that when you say, I want that picture, we've got the rules that say you'll build this picture and here's what that picture looks like.
And I think we, the council, have not seen that technical manual yet.
It's been adopted since 2012.
We haven't seen the new one.
No, you have not.
Okay.
And that's the one you'll be adopting in November.
In October,
that
November, okay.
80% of it will look like what you're adopting tonight because a manhole is a manhole is a manhole.
Gotcha. Councilmember Rogers, I think you had a question.
I have a question. This is not only for the city, it's for our ETJ also, this whole process?
So that's a conversation that we'll have on August 27th. One of the things that we have come to appreciate about the decision to remove unilateral annexation with the stroke of a pen overnight is that we will most likely forever be less than 10 square miles. So why do you care what gets built in the ETJ? And the reason for that is this. It's very difficult to make somebody build to our standard when we're likely to never acquire it. And we're going to cause the county to maintain something at a standard that doesn't meet their expectations either. And it causes people to then spend more money for something that we're likely never to acquire. So it's a complex conversation, and it's a policy conversation for which it is not ours to make. But we, through going through this last week, reached the same question and went, wonder what we ought to do about that. So we'll be bringing that, wonder what y'all want to do about that on the 27th and let y'all talk about it.
Okay. With no more annexation, my question was, why is there an extraterritorial jurisdiction? What does that even mean anymore if you have no ability to annex? And I don't know the answer to that. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not a yes, so try again.
Well, no, that just created more questions, but I'll save those for the 27th. My second question is, how does this new process that starts September 1st affect things that are in process now?
It doesn't. If they're already in process, they are exempt.
Okay, all right, that was...
So I'm glad, Councilmember Rogers, you raised that question because there lies the challenge to all of this. We have literally, in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, rewritten all of this and brought to you. We talked about this today. I've been doing this 30 years. This is probably the most brain damage I've engaged in on a specific city something ever. And we all agree it's just been overwhelming and epic. And as a result of that, we have not had an opportunity to find the cans of worms, just like the now what do we do about ETJ? And so as we go through this, I anticipate that we'll be having a conversation about this process for probably next year. Because every time something comes in, it's going to trigger us to go, oh, what about that? Oh, we didn't factor that in. So I tell you that to tell you that this process is the first of several times that we'll have to bring something to you to clean up. Because we didn't anticipate it, didn't expect it, or it will require y'all to have a policy conversation on something, because the rules that were put in place were done so with a different set of state laws. And when the state law changes, you can't keep the same rules. They no longer work. So this will be an ongoing policy conversation, because you are elected to set the rules. We are paid to enforce your rules. So when we determine that your rules don't work, we'll have to bring them to you. And we are bringing to you today all the rules we know don't work, but I'm pretty sure we're not through bringing you rules that don't work.
Okay, council, any other questions before we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go in the weeds. All right, it is 6:59. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I would encourage everyone to get up and walk around a long airplane flight. It's good to get some movement. 7:06, and we are chipped and watered, so we're ready for the next round. City Manager, you have done such a good job with the first 2 steps that I had a couple folks request. Let's go quickly through the weeds. They're ready to start voting. So I know we're doing the best we can, but let's all hang in there. It's important stuff.
They are talking my language.
There we go.
All right, so let's move. And at this point in time, I'd like you to go to agenda item 3B, specifically item 2, the ordinance. So item 3B, the first item is always the staff report. The second item is always the ordinance.
And this, if it's hard to follow along in the packet, this is the Excel chart that she's given you. It may be easier to follow along that way. Just a suggestion. Do what you want.
So ordinance number 2019-32 deals with the schedule of uniform submittal dates. And the reason for this, I've talked about ad nauseum. You must approve plans or plats within 30 days or deemed approved. Public improvement plan and site plan submittals are recommended for administrative approval, since both are strictly technical reviews. The schedule staggers submittal dates for plan review and DRC meetings. The zoning and plat schedules are built to ensure P&Z action occurs within 30 days from their scheduled meeting, i.e. the last Thursday of the month. The last Thursday of the month is impacted in November by Thanksgiving and December by Christmas. So the zoning ordinance has to be changed to create consistency.
Okay, hang on. Aren't you now on to 3A?
I'm going to deal with them in the totality, and then we'll talk about them in the 2 actions.
Okay.
So the must change the zoning ordinance to create the consistency, and we're going to do meetings will occur before both holidays. There's also a change that will only allows the chairman of the P&Z Commission to schedule special meetings. The ordinance change will add the director of planning and development the authority to do that as well. So in order to adopt the schedule of uniform submittal dates, you have 2 actions. The first one is item 3B, ordinance number 2019-32, and item 3A, ordinance number 2019-29.
I need to know if either one of those require public hearings. Both of them?
Yes.
All right, so council, we will be moving to item 3A, and I got to read it. Hold public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance 2019-29 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending the Bastrop City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 14, Exhibit A, zoning ordinance. 2, administration, Section 8, Planning and Zoning Commission, 8.4, meetings to change the November and December Planning and Zoning Commission meeting dates to comply with Texas Local Government Code Chapter 212, establishing a repealing clause, providing for a severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27th, 2019 agenda for a second reading. I am officially opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up for the public hearing?
No, Mayor.
I am now closing the public hearing. Council, do you have any questions for the city manager regarding ordinance 2019-29?
Move for approval.
I have a motion
Second.
to approve from Councilmember Peterson, a second from Councilmember Ennis. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Thank you, council. The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item 3B, hold public hearing and consider action to approve ordinance 2019-32 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Chapter 14 zoning, Section 1, enacting provisions, adding Section 6.2, annual adoption of a schedule of uniform submittal dates for site plans, zoning changes, and conditional use permits, amending Chapter 10, subdivisions, Article 10.03, subdivision, Section 1, general, adding Section 1.1, annual adoption of schedule of uniform submittal dates for public improvement plans, and adopting schedules of uniform submittal dates for 2019-2020 for site plans, plats, zoning change, conditional use permits, and public improvement plans, as shown as Exhibit A, in order to comply with Texas Local Government Code Chapter 212, which requires plats, site plans, and public improvement plans to be reviewed within 30 days of the submittal or deemed approved, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, and providing an effective date. I am opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, is there anyone signed up to speak?
No, Mayor.
I am closing the public hearing. City Manager, I have two questions. One, and it may be more for the city attorney. Would it be helpful if we said 30 calendar days, or is there a definition that days are always calendar days?
We can add.
I think it would be beneficial to add calendar days, and then the other, I believe the world will continue on to the next year. Is there a mechanism that adds, when will we add dates for 2021, 2022? How will we get the next round of submittal dates?
It is on my list to include, and typically we will set that schedule probably in the summertime, because we have to plan everything else, and so I will probably calendar it to be adopted in July and August, and we'll have it in the ordinance.
Yeah, so City Attorney, I think we should put something in this ordinance that says when we will have the next round of submittal dates, and say that we do in 2-year increments or 8. I don't care what they are, but I think it ought to be a part of the ordinance of how it continues itself.
We can do that.
Okay. Those were my only two questions or comments. Council, any other questions or comments? Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
I would like to continue to reiterate that our quick movement through this entire process and these changes are being brought about under mandate of the state, and that not doing this quickly places us in jeopardy of being in violation of state law.
And being litigated.
Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. House Bill 3167 is the one that's driving all of this. Any other comments or questions?
So should we move to incorporate the changes that you have?
Yes, ma'am, that would be
Inserting
helpful.
a calendar, the word calendar days, and setting a date for it to be
A
extended each
mechanism
year?
for the calendar. Is that, everybody okay with that? City Attorney, I'm looking at you. Does that make sense for a motion from Councilmember Rogers?
It does.
Okay.
Did we close the public hearing already?
Yes, we already did that.
Oh, okay.
So I have a motion from Councilmember Rogers for approval.
Second.
And a second from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
All right, City Manager, back to you. I think we'll be looking at 3K next.
Colin, I need you to move to 3K. So the next thing we'll be talking about is the development review process, and it impacts item 3K, ordinance number 2019-34. Both the zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance reference a requirement for a development review manual. Both allow the Director of Planning and Development to amend the manual with the 30-day process, public notice in the Bastrop Advertiser, and review with the Development Committee. Given the legislative mandates and limited time before the September 1st effective date of House Bill 3167, this process is not applicable. You are essentially going to override this provision by adopting Ordinance 2019-34, and it will be adopted by reference herein, language that will be added in planning for this manual. Please note that the final manual will be adopted as a part of the August 27th attachment. So this ordinance references an attachment you don't have, but when you finally approve it on August 27th, you will have it, and it will resemble the example that you have. Mayor, I think that item is ready for action.
Council, I draw your attention to item 3K that's in the center of page 3. Am I required to have a public hearing on this item? Yes. Well, I thought they said they posted everything on the agenda, but they posted publicly the ones we had to, so we didn't have to do it.
Everything that's in Chapter 14, the zoning manual, requires a public hearing, and this is listed in Chapter 14 of the zoning ordinance.
And we're doing 30 calendar days on this as well. Is that correct or no?
No, the 30 days was only on the submission.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and for clarity, moving on, the agenda has public hearing on all of them, but the paper posted the ones that we had to have, and so there will be some of these that we don't have a public hearing, correct? That's why I'm asking you, or do I need to have them anyway? No.
No,
Okay.
you do not. No, you
All
do
right.
not.
So that's why I'm asking. All right, so we are on 3K. We're in the middle of page 3, and the item reads as follows: hold public hearing and consider action to approve ordinance 2019-34 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, adopting a development manual dated August 27, 2019, in compliance with Chapter 14, zoning, Section 1, enacting provisions, Section 6.1, development manual, and Chapter 10, subdivisions, Article 10.03, subdivision, Section 3, purpose, authority and jurisdiction as shown as Exhibit A, establishing a repealing clause and providing for severability and providing an effective date. I am officially opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up?
No, Mayor.
I am officially closing the public hearing. Council, do you have any questions for the city manager on ordinance 2019-34?
Does this have to come back for a second reading or no?
Yes, ma'am. Everything that you are adopting tonight will come back for a second reading on the 27th.
Okay, she's saying that because it doesn't say that on the agenda. So she'll make the motion for it to be on the second reading. If somebody's going to make a motion, they might want to
Okay,
include that.
Yes, ma'am.
I move to approve and bring it back for a second reading on August 27th.
I have a motion
Second.
from Councilmember Ennis and a second from Councilmember Jackson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Madam Secretary, City Attorney.
Miss Mayor, I believe item 3K, the ordinance should read 2019-31. Correct.
Thank you. So, Councilmember Ennis, do you want to amend your motion to 2019-31?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you satisfied with that amendment, Councilmember Jackson? Wait, they're still talking to each other. Let's make sure.
My apologies, Mayor. That's for item 3M, not 3K.
So it is 34.
Yes, 34 for this one.
Everybody, do we, round of applause? Everybody's, okay, 34. Councilmember Ennis, are you?
I withdraw the amendment.
Okay, all right. We're voting on 2019-34. We have a second. Councilmember Jackson agreed to the second. Is there any further discussion or questions? Councilmember Rogers, are you? Okay, just double checking. Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Okay, the next item is dealing with the subdivision ordinance. And it is a 25-page document. So I'm going to discuss by section what you are adopting, and then when I complete my subdivision ordinance presentation, I will ask the mayor then to call for a vote. So item 3K, which is ordinance 2019-34, is the revisions of the subdivision ordinance. And it is a very meaty piece of documentation. So starting with section 3 of chapter 10 of the subdivision development, or the subdivision ordinance, you are acknowledging that the development manual dated August 27th.
We just approved 3K. That's the one we
3E,
just.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
3,
I think we're on 3E as in elephant, are we not?
Yes.
We were on the top of page 2
so,
of your
so
Excel
let
sheet.
me get us all on track. You just adopted 3K that fixes section 3 of the subdivision ordinance, because that document had language to amend the planning chapter, which is chapter 42, and the subdivision ordinance. So I'm just acknowledging that that is a change that you've adopted.
Okay.
So now we're moving to the subdivision ordinance. Section 410 deals with standard procedures for plating. And what we have done in this chapter is simplified plating. And so while we are creating a plating checklist, and at the top of that checklist are the types of plats that we require. And each one of these particular items on the checklist tells you which ones you have to comply depending on the plat you're submitting. So rather than having 4 or 5 individual plating checklists, we're going to have one. This incorporates the enhanced permit review process that you adopted in council as a condition to plating. It adds a definition of a preliminary plat. It provides a detailed process for plating. It adds the definition of a final plat, provides the detailed process for that. It also adopts standard plat notes as a part of the checklist. It adopts signature blocks that now are in accordance with the administrative and municipal authorities that you're granting staff and planning and zoning. It provides language that says if you have an incomplete submission, we will return it. It acknowledges state law. Instead of having separate definitions, we've just referenced state law, so it keeps it clean. It deals with the recordation of the plats and that fees are due. This also creates an official development review committee. It establishes the purpose of the committee. It defines the committee as representatives from planning and zoning, engineering, public works, water, wastewater, electric, fire, parks, building inspection, and the city manager's office. The powers and duties of DRC, and I will read them since they're new, will provide technical review and analysis of each project in a holistic manner, provide consistent feedback, and ensure all recommendations for disapproval have clear and convincing evidence to meet the requirements of the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 212. We will approve applications which meet intent, standard, and requirements if no public consultation is required by state law or city ordinance. We will recommend approval or disapproval of exceptions and waivers to the City Council in accordance with the stormwater drainage section, which you are amending this evening. And we will conduct annual reviews of all technical manuals and provide a consolidated list of recommendations for council consideration, just like you're asking P&Z to do on the zoning side. Under infrastructure plans, section 5.05.2. Section 5.05 is a new section in the subdivision ordinance. It now contains the infrastructure plan requirements, and it will become a checklist. It also provides the legal authority for state law to use as a basis for disapproval. It provides submittal instructions, addresses incomplete submissions, and gives approval authority to the city engineer within 30 days. In section 5.05.3, we address public improvement plans. And this explains the submittal process, the requirement for a final drainage plan prior to submittal. It too has a public improvement plan requirement checklist that will become a handout in 5.05.3b. The public improvement plan agreement, I realized as I was reviewing to build this, the paragraph is missing in the ordinance, but it will be in the final ordinance, and it will recognize that the draft public improvement plan agreement will become your standardized template. It will require approval by City Council before having a pre-construction meeting. The construction process of the public improvements is located in section 5.05. It explains the steps, which is a pre-construction meeting, notice to proceed letter, infrastructure acceptance, as-built. It requires the TxDOT permits if it's in infrastructures in the right-of-way. It says a final plat cannot be filed without all public infrastructure built, the city engineer issuing the letter of concurrence, and that public infrastructure will be deemed as accepted when the final plat is adopted. So, Mayor, that concludes.
I think we skipped over that it is also adding a definition of filed, and specifically to Councilmember Rogers, it's adding a definition of a sketch drawing. Councilmember Ennis asked that. That's on the top of page 2 on the Excel, and I think you talked about, we've already taken care of part of that with 3K, but there were a couple items above, and I just wanted to make sure we got those included. So we'll have definitions of both of those things. Okay, so we are, she's just told you a whole lot of things about 3E. 3E is near the bottom of page 2. Hold public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-26 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending the Code of Ordinances, Article 10.03, Subdivision Ordinances, Section 2, General, Section 3, Purpose, Authority, and Jurisdiction, Section 4, Platting Procedures, and Section 5, Standard Division Design Requirements, approving a standardized public improvement agreement as attached as Exhibit A, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27th, 2019 agenda for a second reading. Do I need a public hearing? No. So I do not need a public hearing, so we aren't having one. Council, any questions for the city manager? And we, city attorney, we're sure that it is 2019-26. Everybody's got thumbs up on that? Okay, good deal. Any questions or comments? Councilor Brennan?
Since we say we're public hearing, do we need to have it?
No, they said that we published the ones in the paper, and the city attorney confirmed that if it's not required, we don't have to have
But
it.
if it's on the agenda?
That's, I asked her, and she said we don't have to do it.
Okay.
Is there any
Do you need a
question?
motion or?
I move to approve, including the paragraph that the city manager says will be added.
Okay, I have a
Second
motion
reading.
to approve from Councilmember Rogers with the expectation there'll be a paragraph about the public improvement plan.
I'll second that motion then.
I have a second from Councilmember Jackson. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
All right, Mayor and Council, we're moving to item 3F, ordinance number 2019
It's page 6 of your handout, top of page 6.
-27. This deals with the enhanced permit review process. You adopted an ordinance in April that included a definition listing specific chapters of the Code of Ordinances that are required to follow your enhanced permit process. We are now amending this to exclude zoning because the zoning process now requires a pre-application meeting. The preliminary and final plats are addressed as a part of the pre-development meeting, and it will include minor plats as a part of the enhanced permit review process. So this is untangling this requirement from the enhanced permit review process so that there's no conflict, and acknowledging the pre-development meeting process. And,
Okay, council, on your page 6, this says item 3F, ordinance 2019-26, but 2019-26 was 3E, and on 3F, the agenda says 2019-27. So I
it
want
is
to make
20,
sure.
it's 27, I just copied and pasted.
That's fine,
and
I just
finished.
want to make sure that, okay, so it's definitely 27, so I am now going to read agenda item 3F. I'm near the bottom of page 2. Am I required to have a public hearing? No. No public hearing. Consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-27 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending ordinance number 2019-16 enhanced permit process, Chapter 5 definitions, establishing a repealing clause, providing for a severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27, 2019 agenda for second reading. Any questions for the city manager?
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Madam City Manager, this, to be clear, this streamlines the process and clarifies some of the new items that we've had to place into consideration.
Let me say this a different way. It enhances your enhanced permitting process. So the enhanced permitting process you adopted in April had a very preliminary review. We have left minor plats as a preliminary review, but if it involves a preliminary or final plat or a site plan, it requires a pre-development meeting and is addressed either in Chapter 41 of the Planning Ordinance or Chapter 10 of the Subdivision Ordinance, and will be more stringent than the enhanced permitting process that you adopted in April.
That enhances my clarity. Thank you.
There you go. Councilmember Ennis, did you have your, I thought you had your light on. I didn't know if you had a question. Councilmember Jackson, do you have a question?
No,
Okay. Okay, so we are on item 3F. We're on 2019-27. We have enhanced clarifications, and we're
Move
ready
to
for a
approve.
motion. I have a motion to approve from Councilmember
Second.
Ennis and a second from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Thank you, council. The motion passes unanimously. City manager.
Mayor and council, I'm going to talk about the site plan process. It will require 4 actions, all of which will require public hearings because they all impact Chapter 41 of the planning, 42 of the planning, the zoning ordinance. So I'm going to walk through all of them and then we'll let you vote.
And I'm hearing some conversation. Are we in the middle of page 6 and we're getting ready to talk about 3G, 3H, 3I, 3J?
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody know where we are?
So
All right,
how about
good
we
to go.
take these one at a time? So let's talk about item 3G first. It establishes a site plan review process that can meet the 30-day required approval. It provides submittal requirements. It establishes a site plan detail requirement checklist so that each item is a specific item listed in the ordinance, which gives legal authority as required by state law to use as a basis for disapproval. And it authorizes the Director of Planning and Zoning to administratively approve. That's what's included in Ordinance 2019-28, Mayor.
All right, we are on agenda item 3G. It's the very bottom of page 2. Hold public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-28 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Chapter 14, Section 42, Site Development Plan Review, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27th, 2019 agenda for a second reading. We're sure it's 2019-28.
Yes.
Yes, Mayor.
And I am officially opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No, Mayor.
I'm officially closing the public hearing. Does anyone have any, I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from
Second.
Councilmember Jackson. I have a second from Councilmember Peterson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Council. City Manager.
We are moving to item 3H, ordinance number 2019-31. Essentially, this removes the site plan requirement as a part of the plan development process and replaces it with a zoning concept scheme. You might understand that plan development is a zoning process, the site plan requires a 30-day approval, and they are in conflict. So we're taking the site plan out, replacing it with a zoning scheme, but the site plan will still be required to be filed prior to any construction if you're multifamily or commercial. That concludes item 3H, ordinance 2019-31.
And I got concurrence from City Attorney, 2019-31.
Yes, Mayor.
All right. We are on the first item on page 3H. Hold public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-31 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Chapter 14, Section 32 PD, Plan Development District, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27, 2019 agenda for a second reading. I'm officially opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up for the public hearing?
No, Mayor.
I'm officially closing the public hearing. I'm happy to entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, in order to comply with House Bill 67, I'm sorry, I move to approve the first reading and place this on August 27th agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. I have a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Is there any discussion on the motion on the table? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Council. City Manager.
Item 3I, ordinance number 2019-32, removes the site plan as a part of the conditional use permit, replaces it with a zoning concept scheme, and requires the site plan to be filed prior to any construction. Mayor?
I am on item 3I, a little farther down on page 3. Hold public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-32 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Chapter 14, Section 33 CUP, or Conditional Use Permit, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27, 2019 agenda for second reading. We're sure it's 2019-32?
Yes, Mayor.
All right, we're all good to go. I am officially opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No, Mayor.
We're officially closing the public hearing. I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Ennis.
Second.
I have a tied second. I'm giving my tie to to Councilmember Peterson. And is there any discussion on the motion regarding conditional use permit? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Council. City Manager.
Mayor and Council, item 3J, ordinance number 2019-33, incorporates a pre-development meeting as a requirement for a zoning application, requiring a sketch drawing with the definition. And for folks that are reviewing the ordinance online, the only portion that is changing in this ordinance is what is highlighted in yellow. That completes our presentation.
I like that it's highlighted in yellow. I like that part very much. Okay, we are in the middle of page 3. We are on item 3J. Hold public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-33 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Chapter 14, Section 10, changes and amendments to all zoning ordinances and districts and administrative procedures, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on August 27, 2019 for second reading. City Attorney, 33 is the right one?
That's correct, Mayor.
Excellent. I am officially opening the public hearing. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No, Mayor.
I'm officially closing the public hearing. Council, I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I moved it.
I have
I
a motion. The tie goes to Councilmember Jackson this time, with the motion and a second from Councilmember Rogers. Any discussion for the item for the motion on the table? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. City Manager.
Item 3L, ordinance number 2019-35, deals specifically with the construction technical manual. Our construction technical manual dictates how public infrastructure is constructed. It was adopted in 2012. Part of the reason for tonight is for you to adopt it tonight by ordinance so that we can find the legislation that authorizes this. We think it was adopted by minute ordinance, but we don't have something that we can go back and find. The ordinance will formally include several additional abbreviations just for clarity, and include the design standards for the new street signage. Chapter 4, which used to include the stormwater drainage aspects, was repealed in April when you adopted your stormwater drainage ordinance. So that completes my presentation on item 3L.
Council, any questions? City Manager, I think the reason, I just want to reiterate for public, because we've been here for quite a while, that the reason it is so important that we have an ordinance, because based on House Bill 3167, we have to be able to cite why they are not in compliance. And if we don't have an ordinance that we can point back to, we basically have no grounds for denying it, even if, because we can't find the citings. Is that correct, City Attorney?
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay. So we are on 3L. We're near the bottom of page 3. And this is not Chapter 14. Do I need a public hearing? I do not. So consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-35. Is that the right one, City Attorney?
That's correct.
All right. The City Council, City of Bastrop, Texas, adopting construction standards technical manual dated January 2012, amending Chapter 1, 2 references, abbreviations, definitions, and adding the street sign standard as attached in Exhibit A, establishing a repealing clause, providing severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27, 2019 agenda for a second reading. Council?
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Ennis.
Point of order.
Point of order, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes, in your reading, you refer to chapter 1, 2 references. I believe that's chapters 1
Is that
through
1 through
11.
11? Is it 1 through 11?
No, it's
Or is it chapter
2.
1,
2.
article 2?
It's 2. It's chapter
Chapter
1,
one,
section 2 references. That's
So
how it.
this is the part where we say, I was right.
I was attempting to clarify.
No, thank you for asking. I stuttered over that because I wasn't sure which way it is, but that's like a Roman numeral 2 as a part of the outline, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I read it okay, City Attorney, we're good?
Yes, we are good.
Okay, thank you for asking. I wasn't sure which way to read it. That was a very good question.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion from Councilmember Ennis. I have a second from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Thank you, Council. Motion passes unanimously. City Manager, Council, we're on page 7.
Item 3M deals with stormwater drainage ordinance that you adopted in April. This adds the requirement for the pre-submittal meeting in compliance with the enhanced review process. It adds the language for the pre-submittal meeting for subdivision as an optional information gathering meeting with staff. It makes the conceptual drainage plan a part of the pre-development meeting submittal, makes the preliminary drainage plan a requirement prior to submitting a preliminary plat, and makes the final drainage plan and operational and maintenance plan a requirement prior to submitting a public improvement plan submittal.
Operations and maintenance plan for stormwater, they are not always required, but they would be required if someone installs something that requires maintenance. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct.
So you don't have to do one, you have to do one if you need one.
That's right.
Okay. I
And
just want to clarify that.
what this does is if you need it, you need to submit it with the final drainage plan, so we know how you're going to maintain what we're going to accept for you to construct.
And this then makes sure that any new development, that the existing citizens don't end up bearing the cost of maintaining that new drainage structure.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to clarify for the public. Councilmember Rogers.
And if we're gonna they're submitting a plan on how they're going to maintain it, do we have ways of making sure they do that?
In the stormwater drainage ordinance, it outlines it, and that would be one of the things that I anticipate we would see in that public improvement plan, Matt, is that is addressed and taken care of if it's not, so.
So we basically have their money. If they don't do it, we have the ability to do it. We have a bond or something. We may not physically have money, but we have a means of going back to the person who created it and said they would do it. We can hold them accountable. Okay. Great question, Councilmember Rogers. Anybody else a question before we go to the action item? All right, we're moving to, it's 3M. It's the last action item before citizens' comments. We're on the bottom of page 3. This is not chapter 14, so I don't think I need a public, I do need a public.
Nope, you don't need a public hearing, but this is for ordinance number 36.
Yes, 2019. Oh, so not 35 that's on the Excel and not 30 that's on the agenda, but 36.
Our city secretary is telling me it is 36 is the correct number.
Everybody agrees. All right, I'm reading it with 36, 2019-36. Thank you very much, City Attorney. All right, we're on item 3M. Consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-36 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending the City of Bastrop Stormwater Drainage Design Manual, Section 2, Stormwater Drainage Policy, B, Stormwater Drainage Design Process, Section 3, Conceptual Drainage Plans, Section 4, Preliminary Drainage Plans, and Section 5, Final Drainage Plans, and Section 6, Operations and Maintenance Plan, establishing a repealing clause, providing for severability, providing an effective date, and move to include on the August 27, 2019 agenda for second reading. Any motion?
I move to approve.
I have a motion from Councilmember Rogers. I have
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Ennis. Is there any further discussion on ordinance number 2019-36? Madam Secretary, if you will call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, council. And I just want to say to the city secretary, the city attorney, the city manager, and staff, I don't know how you guys are keeping any of these ordinance numbers straight. And I truly appreciate you guys double checking in each other, and we're all stronger as a team, and just really want to tell you how much I appreciate all the work that you've
I'm
put
going
in.
to take full responsibility when you do this at night and on Saturday, and Ann's not here to keep you straight. This is what happens. So I assume full responsibility for it's not right.
I like that everyone's leaning over to Ann's computer. She definitely has the master list. Are we getting nervous? That's a nervous face on the city attorney.
We have not addressed these yet.
Mayor and council, that
Okay.
concludes all of the review changes required for House Bill 3167. At this point, we move to fees, which is 3D, and then stormwater drainage, which is 3C. So if you've been checking all of your boxes, we should be down to the last
down
two
to
things.
Okay, council, we've been going 50 minutes, but it's two big sections. Do you need another real quick break, or we're going to do one section and then we'll see if we need to take a break? Everybody okay? All right, rock and roll. We're doing 3D first. Mr. Jones.
Mayor and council, thank you. Good evening. This is item 3D, and this is an update on our fee schedule. And so that's what we're going to talk about this evening. So just an overview of what we're going to talk about with item 3D, what is staying the same, accommodate the permits used by citizens, what departments and or positions make up development when we talk about development costs, what are the total costs of development, how we review or how we got to the numbers we got to. We'll go over some of the new charges that you wouldn't have seen prior to, and then we'll also talk a little bit more about that 75 and 25% split that the city manager spoke about last night and earlier today. And then we'll also talk about some of the things like the drainage requirements now, decoupling of the ordinances, and why that's important in that 75 and 25% split.
Okay, Mr. Jones, hang on just a second.
Yes.
113 in the packet. Everybody's frantically trying
My
to
apologies,
get there.
yeah.
And there is no handout on this, so we can follow along. I don't think we have this PowerPoint, right?
You do not. Oh, you do have this? The revised packet? Okay.
And hang on, with this, I don't think we have it.
I'm not believing they have this in the revised.
Okay, and that's fine, I'm just wanting to, I think what we've got is the ordinance and then the list
The
of the fees
fees.
to start.
Which will be important because you can't read them on the screen, so you're gonna have to follow along in your packet.
Okay, and the first part of the packet that, for us, that shows fees is on page 116. I just didn't want them looking for the
Mm-hmm. Sure.
PowerPoint if it wasn't, I'm just trying to keep us all on the same
I
page.
had PDF'd it, I'm sorry, we'll upload it for you.
It's fine. Okay, so we're going to be looking at 116 and following along on the TDs.
Yes,
Thank you,
ma'am.
Mr. Jones.
No problem. So first of all, I just wanted to kind of talk about what we're not changing and why that's important. These are the permit fees that are not going to see any increase in the fees over what they are today. And that's important because these are mostly fees that are pulled by existing residents. So they pay property taxes already that help supplement the general fund that go to pay for development services and the cost of that. So that's where some of that 25% comes into play. I'll touch on that a little bit more in depth in a minute, but I just wanted to make that clear up front that some of these fees that we know our residents are feeling the brunt of, those are not changing. And those include everything from trade permits, so your MEPs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fencing permits, roofing permits, residential swimming pools, and accessory buildings. Now, I will say that anything, this one did change slightly. If you're under 160 square feet, it did not change, but if you're over 160 square feet, it kicks in the enhanced permit review, and so it did go up slightly just because there's a lot of additional staff time to get through that process.
And the
So-
160 square feet was in the enhanced permit
That's correct.
ordinance, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's where that came from. And again, irrigation permits and our favorite lots of record did not go up on those. So just to be clear, that's mostly what, your residents are paying and coming in for with their contractors. So we want to make sure that as much as possible, the effects of 3167 and 852 didn't have much effect on our existing population. So the development team, who is that, and what does that make of, and what does that look like when we go through that process that we just got done fixing? So the development review committee is made up of internal and external partners. So the internal city team would be the planning and zoning department, our engineering, public works, water, wastewater, BP&L, fire, parks, building inspections, and the city manager's office. So that's everybody internal that will review those development permits, the subdivision plats, site development plans.
If you will pause, the
I can.
PowerPoint is indeed in the packet. It's on
Oh.
page 164.
Thank you, city manager.
No, thank you, Ann Franklin.
Thank you, Angela. Madam Secretary, thank you. Well, everybody caught up? Yeah. All right. Almost, okay. And then we have some external partners when needed that we include on that review. So sometimes the plan will require a third-party engineering review. We have several partners in the utility and franchise world: Aqua, WCID, Corex, Bluebonnet, Centerpoint, countless telecommunications from Spectrum and others, AT&T, ESD number 1 and 2. Certain things require involvement of TxDOT, obviously, have several highways through the town. Our river, LCRA partners, Bastrop County certainly, and some things we clue in BISD. So if it's a large residential neighborhood, we'll make sure we notify them and the demographers get that on their information. So this is a list of people. This is not in your packet, but just for this is the development process as it looks laid out, and so all these people are involved in all of these steps going through from start to finish. So you can see it's a lot of detail, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of moving pieces and people involved. So that gets us to kind of development costs. So we talked about 3167, we talked about 852, and how that significantly impacted this process. And it's resulted in some higher fees. Some of that is directly contributed to the decoupling of the regulations as recommended by City Attorneys Association, Planning Association, other professionals. And it really is a process that we thought we were going to streamline and deregulate and take the bureaucracy out. We've now been told that we got to put it back in. So that's kind of the reason you're seeing some of these fees. We have new fees, completeness checks. We have concept, preliminary, and final drainage plans. We have special agreements, plan developments, infrastructure plan review, and then site development plan. So those are some fees that are going up. And I'll tell you how we got to those fees, and then we'll kind of walk through some of them when we get there. But what we did is did a detailed analysis of everybody, every staff position that's involved from the development review team. And we broke that out into an hourly cost to the city that it takes to review plans, review processes, and get a plan through this new process. And that's how we came up with the hourly rate for DRC. And then we took each of those processes and we put it up on a whiteboard and said, how long does it take each position to review each item in our process, and what is that hourly cost going to be to the city so we can pass that through to the developer. And that's how we got the development process cost. So we took the required hours by the required staff, multiplied that by the DRC cost, and then we got the base application fee. I will point out that there's an administrative 5% administrative fee on every single permit we touch. There's a lot of administration that goes through emails, clerical work. Everything that's not included in the technical review will be made up to cover some of those costs on the technical side. So intake, for example, phones, emails, and things of that nature. So that is something new that we've added, and I'll get to kind of how we compare on that here in a minute. Any questions on that? Okay. 75 and 25% allocation. So what is it? The city manager again touched on that last night. I think she did a great job. But essentially that's the goal that's we're set for ourselves internally to kind of get to that split. So our FY20 development costs are a little bit over $1 million. This year our projected revenue are roughly $500,000. So we're only recuperating about 50%. And that's important because the state constitution says that public dollars cannot go to fund private purposes. And so we want to be able to adhere to that, and we want to make sure our development fees are covering the cost of development and not going to a public or a private institute. But for the reasons I explained earlier, through those trade permits, fences, lot of record, a lot of that is going to be covered through the private or the public dollars through the general fund, and so that's where the 25% makes up. Now this is a little bit of a projection, so you can see there in the fourth bullet down, it's, well, nope, I'm sorry. It's a little bit of a dance, it's a little bit of a crystal ball because we may not know 18 months from now what's going to be walking through the door, but this gets us through a pretty good analysis when we look at absorption rates for the current builders, what we know might be in the pipeline, and so we anticipate that with these updated fees and the projected expenditure for the development department for next year that we'll cover 75%, maybe a little bit more if everything comes in that we think it will. So that gets me to the schedule of fees. So I believe that the schedule of fees starts on page 116 in the packet. And I apologize that I do not have them up here because, quite frankly, it'd be impossible to read. But some things you'll see in there, the proposed fire fees, comparison of the existing and proposed permitting, inspection, and development fees, a City of Austin fee schedule, and then our permitting, inspection fees, and development fees. So I wanted to touch on a couple. I'm sorry?
Hang on just a second, because I got to page 118, and it says see fire plan and review and inspection fees, Appendix A.
It's behind it, I believe.
So if I keep going, we'll get to fire fees?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Do we know what page?
Between 116 and 159, I think. Sorry, I apologize.
Funny man, late at night. Funny man. Okay, I saw fire sprinkler. Fire, am I getting close?
Thank you. So I wanted to, while y'all are kind of reviewing those, I wanted to touch on a few of them. The reason we put in the Austin fee schedule is because, as city manager said last night, when we got to reviewing these things, we kind of got to looking at other cities. And, like the effects of 3167, the law doesn't care how big your department is. We're required to do the same amount of work that the city of Austin is. They just have more people to do it. But we just want to make sure we're accurately recouping our costs. But I wanted to point out some of the new fees, the new completeness check. As required, we're going to do a completeness check to make sure all applications are complete. That's a new fee of $250. Our conceptual, preliminary, and final drainage plan, since we had to decouple all of our review processes, those are all separate fees. Special agreements is something that we looked at, so like a public improvement district, a MUD, something like that. It's actually a $25,000 fee. For reference, the city of Austin is between $96,000 and $107,000, so I believe you're getting a pretty good deal for your money. Plan development, similar. You're going through an extreme amount of work, of headache, of public input, of everything to make sure the new B3 codes are fiscally sustainable, geographically sensitive, and authentic Bastrop. So if somebody comes in and says they want to do different, it's going to take a lot more work to work through that. It's a lot more public input. It's a lot more staff work. So that fee based off development review committee work would be $9,000. For the city of Austin, it's $48,000 to $63,000 to do the same thing. For site development plans, we'll review that for $1,700 now. For reference, the city of Austin is between $12,000 and $13,000. And our plats, between the preliminary, final, and minor plats and things like that, range from $1,700 to $2,300. And for reference, the city of Austin charges $13,000 and $14,000 respectively. So that's just to kind of give you an example of what our next door neighbors are charging. Again, we spend a lot of time and effort, and these base fees recuperate just the cost of it getting through our processes. And so all of those fees have been provided there for you. You can see what they were and then what we're proposing. Again, the majority of them that are affecting residents are not changing. And then we've had to add a few new fees. And I believe with that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
So I see on some of these tenant finish out and remodel and stuff, you guys established a new construction permit fee, and your proposed, I'm just trying to make sure I'm going to, proposed of $1 million or less. I thought we can't do it based on the value.
Oh, I can answer that. So 852 only speaks to residential buildings. So new commercial, we're still okay.
Okay, so then that's why the new construction permit residential is
Yeah.
based on square footage.
Yes, and let me go back and cover that. I apologize, I skipped over that. So the new residential breakdown, you'll see it's structured by square footage. The smaller home you build, the less the permit will be, because we didn't want to charge the same permit fee for every type of house and every size of house. So hopefully, even our fee structure will make it a little bit more affordable to enter the market here, just based off what you'll be charged in permit fees.
So I see that the shell building permit was 65% before, and it's proposed as 65%, but tenant finish out was 35%, and now it's 65%. That's a pretty big jump.
Yes, but so the 65%, you're still reviewing the same amount of work, but now you're going to have to do it. You're actually doing it twice, because on the interior finish out, everything that you would review, you're still having to review, because you might have fire will have to do their review because you have Knox box locations, FTC hookups, things of that nature. And that was just a cost of it running through our building department. And when they broke it down, it was the same amount of review time. And so some of these fees are increasing because we looked at our actual cost. I'm not sure what they were based on in the past, but when you looked at the building inspector and our building official, when you looked at their time in reviewing those plans, it broke out to the same.
So if you had a new building and you, like my husband and I decided to build a building and we were going to finish it out, then we wouldn't have a finish out
That's right.
permit, because if the more you
Yes.
turn in at the beginning, the more they can review, and you review it once. But
That's
if
right.
you turn in a set of plans, and then you turn in a set of finish-out plans.
That's correct.
Then that, am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely.
So for folks that aren't in the construction business, let's talk about how this might happen. You might have somebody come in and build, say the facility where Fuzzies and Minchie's and Mama Foo's is. And so in order for that building to be constructed, it would be built as a shell building. And when it's complete, we would issue a CO, because that CO then allows them to start recruiting tenants. And so Fuzzies comes in and they submit a set of plans. Well, Fuzzies has a kitchen and it has grease traps and all kinds of fire things that are pretty detailed. There's a pool company next door, so it's not going to have a lot of fancy stuff in it. So what this process does is we have to literally act like we've not seen it before and then go back through it specific to the tenant. So this gives you an example of when we have to get it to that CO process, and who's responsible for it at that point pays the fee. And then when you come in and now cause us to have to look at your project and spend that staff time, you then have to pay that cost. And finish out is more complex and complicated to review than a shell building. Mm-hmm. And all of that just is the nature of the beast.
On the trade show and exhibit permits, like, I'm just trying to do this for understanding. There's a gun show this weekend, so do they pay one $100 fee, or does every person who has a table pay a $100 fee?
I'm sorry, what
It's
fee?
trade show exhibit permits. Permit required for all events classified
Oh,
as
for
trade
the
shows.
fire?
It's one.
It's just
It's-
one.
it's
I'm
one
sorry.
permit. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the place that might not be the case, because it's one building, if Visit Bastrop were to recruit some kind of special festival, and we have a multitude of vendors that are coming in, and we have to go in and do permits for every vendor, then in that instance, those vendors would have to pay the fee, because it might be 3 or 4 city blocks of things.
Gotcha.
Versus he's just going to the convention center and inspecting the facility one time.
So we're looking at a chart. Is there documentation to back you up, or is that, are you allowed to have some subjectivity based on the effort?
I think we have the ability to have subjectivity on the effort as long as the fees are calculated in compliance with the state law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Council, any questions on the fees? Councilmember Rogers?
Yeah, but give me 1 second to get back to the page that was. Oh, of course, I'm going to ask you a question about signs. What is a master comprehensive sign plan?
Yeah, so that would be for like a large development that comes in and they want to do a sign plan, and this is in the current ordinance, so that's why the fee is there. I don't know that we'll have that in the new ordinance, but it's essentially a master sign plan for a large development that would have a mix of signs, so like wall signs, monument signs, group monument signs, so it's just a
like
myriad.
Burleson Crossing, is that what you're talking about? That kind of big development of
No,
signs,
not
or-
really, because they are individual signs. They do have one group sign. I think that's all they have. But this would be if it was a uniform and they're saying everybody in this development, their sign shall look this way. For us to review that, that would be a fee.
So right now, you're not charging them anything and you're going to $500.
We
Yes.
don't have this, so this would be anticipated in our new code, a development that comes in with a specific brand that is dictating all that,
We do have it. We don't have it anywhere in town.
okay.
So
I was going to say, I think the better question is, have we ever collected
No.
a master
So Burleson
comprehensive
Crossing-
sign
That's
plan
what I was
permit?
making sure. There's nobody
just
that's right
defaults
now
to
has
the
ever done
current
it.
sign code. So
Okay.
we don't have it anywhere in town. It's in the ordinance. It's just never been used.
And with our codes that we're adopting, we will have standards, so
You'll have a
people
regulating
comply
plan
to
in the
that.
future that
Okay.
more than likely will have a signage plan.
Okay, Councilmember Ennis?
Is there a definition of what constitutes remodeling in a residential context?
That's a great question. I'll answer it to the best of my knowledge, but I think the IRC covers that. But there are some things.
IRC is International
Residential Code. So right now we're under 2009. And essentially there are some things like light fixtures you can change like for like that don't require a permit. You can do some interior walls if they're not structural. But anything that requires a plumber, electrician, HVAC, for example, that would be involved if you're adding on to your structure. If you're altering a load-bearing wall, that would be a remodel. But like if you're redoing your carpet, doesn't constitute a remodel under that code.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So Councilmember Ennis asked a great question. So if it's a remodel, then you could end up paying a remodel fee, a electrical permit fee, a plumbing permit fee.
Yes, ma'am.
That wouldn't be included in the remodel
Yes, ma'am.
fee.
No, because they're all separate permits and they're all separate inspections.
Inspection is the key, Mayor.
Yes, ma'am.
Every one of those requires a specific inspection that's covered with this fee.
Okay, so what are you inspecting on the remodel that you're not inspecting with fire, electrical, or plumbing?
So on the remodel, it would be the interior, so the structural,
Okay.
things of that nature. There's different U ratings for window, just all kinds of different things that you might look at. Whereas a bathroom remodel might require a mechanical, plumbing, and electrical. So depending on the intensity of the remodel would depend on your number of inspections required, which is the reason to break it out.
Okay, Councilmember Ennis, I'm not sure, I apologize if I cut you off. Were you done with that question?
You gave me another one,
Okay.
which is, you start adding up all these fees, and there's some people that just can't afford that kind of remodel. I mean, if it's something that involves, say, replacing a sink or doing things like that, you're talking $500 plus the inspection fees. It's not going to be worthwhile to do the project if you get that many fees stacked on top of one another.
Well, there's a couple of comments. First of all, maintenance is not remodel, and so not everything that you do to keep your house maintained constitutes needing a permit or a fee. And while I appreciate that these are expensive, the comment I would make is, as a taxpayer, I don't want to subsidize your remodel if you can't afford it. And so what we're attempting to do is to recoup just our costs.
I understand all that. I'm talking about someone out there who's living on a pretty tight budget, and they need to do some remodel in either their kitchen or their bathroom, and it's going to make it prohibitive, some of these fees. And that's what I was looking for, is a finer demarcation line between in the remodel sequence.
Councilmember Ennis, I think the best way to address that would be that the international codes would be the answer, and the answers are based on the specific remodel. So we would encourage that particular situation for somebody to come in and sit down and visit with us and let us work through the process, better understand the specifics, and deal with them on a case-by-case basis, because there's so many asterisks of how this could work that you're right, it could get very expensive. So if we understand what they're trying to do, it's possible we can work with them to help them the most cost-effective way in how they put together a process. Because the unfortunate part, and we fall victim to this every day, is people come in and ask the question they know to ask. And oftentimes the question they know to ask is not the right question. And so we answer their question and they go off thinking we've told them they've got to pull a permit for this, when maybe they do, maybe they don't, but we answered the question that was asked. So in a situation where we've got some residents that are trying to put together a budget or put together a remodel. That's why we have staff, and we will have an opportunity to sit down with them and can answer those specific questions. Because in the case of a bathroom, you might have to have multiple plumbing inspections, and my bathroom doesn't need electrical, but might need HVAC, and Trey could do one that would need something completely different. And all of those inspections drive the fees. So it's a very complex question to give you a very simple answer to.
Is there any component of hardship in any of this?
The mayor and I meet on a quarterly basis with the community support groups, and Habitat for Humanities is one of the people that we sponsor, and they have programs particularly for the elderly that do retrofit to make houses appropriate as we age. And we also work with the Ministerial Alliance. When we have projects, we can kind of put the word out on the streets. It may not be quick, but when there's a need and it's for real, there are networks that we can utilize. We can't make any guarantees, but this is one of the things that Habitat for Humanities asks for money on an annual basis from us, so that they can help with situations like this.
And we've also, Bastrop Long-Term Recovery, they have some veterans programs and stuff that we utilize. Councilmember Rogers and then Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Peterson, you had your light on and then you turned it off. So, okay. Well, okay, we're going to do Councilmember Rogers, and then we'll do Councilmember Peterson, and then we'll do Councilmember Jackson. I'm trying to pay attention when I saw lights go on. Councilmember Rogers.
I have a question about your commercial occupancy permit that you offer. It was, now I lost my pages as I was thinking, listening to everybody else. You have a fee for a reinspection or if they change ownerships, but I do know you have several businesses that, or older businesses in town that have actually never gotten it. Will they be considered like a reissue, or will they have to be considered a higher fee of the brand new ones that's a higher fee? I mean, will the city give them a break because they were never asked for it before? And see what I'm saying?
That's a policy
Yes, it
decision,
is a
ma'am.
policy question. So the fee is set in order for the required inspections for our building official and fire department to go out there and do their required inspections for a CO. So the fact that they have been able to operate without one.
Oh, no, what I was asking was, okay, so it's $150 if they, right now it's $150 if they change ownership, and $250, but I couldn't find it in your other ones if it's higher. Let's say it's a brand new building. Is it higher than that, or is that the fee?
No, it's 250.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah,
what I
I'm
was.
sorry.
I was thinking,
I misunderstood your
because
question.
your print gets a little smaller, and on
Sure,
the other
yeah.
pages, so I was trying to
No,
find it,
it's
and then I was
250 flat.
asking- That's all I was asking.
Right.
Okay, so Councilmember Rogers, we're good for now? All right, Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, Matt, I was trying to find something on, what are the fees on, or permits on replacing an existing structure that is identical refit of a structure that's already there.
That would be an accessory building permit.
Okay.
So let me.
What if it's the house?
But
If it's the house, it's going to
Well,
be.
no, answer his question
Oh.
first.
well, my question just recently I replaced a carport.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's accessory building, but it's not new construction. It's just replacing the existing structure.
Yep. So if it's 160 square feet or less, it's $75. Anything over that is $300 because it requires an enhanced permit review.
Okay.
That answer your question? Councilmember Jackson?
I guess I was a little confused on maintenance versus just
Yeah.
remodeling and things. I got a little confused there. Say, for instance, the toilet or sink had to be replaced. Is there a permit? I mean, there are permit fees for that, or are there different?
There are a list of. I can provide you a list. I don't want to misspeak to you tonight, but there are several items if you're like for like. I believe a sink might be one. Certain things. I'm not sure if a toilet facility is one of them.
I'm going to step out here on a limb, and I might get the dirty look from staff. But if your sink or toilet needs to be replaced and you can do it, we don't need to hear from you. If you need to call a plumber, then they probably are going to have to pull a permit. But there are some things that I happen to have a very handy husband. It falls under maintenance for me. I'm going to pick it out. He's going to install it. We're going to move on down the road. So that's what I mean by the difference between maintenance and remodel. If you are activating a plumber and it begins to activate our codes, then they are professionally required by virtue of their license to follow the codes adopted by the city. Yeah. And that's the distinction between remodel and maintenance, is how handy are you? Yeah.
Well, and if they start messing with the connection to the city service, that's a whole different ballgame
and
than turning off a ball valve.
Yeah, it's really just the inspection fee that you're covering. But similar to some of the things that are not codified in our development process, nowhere in our current ordinance does it say what requires a permit. So we're going to follow up with you on that and bring something for you to look at in the future.
Councilmember Jackson, did you have another question?
No, now I'm clear about it now. I mean, thanks, City Manager, and thank you also for helping, but I think I'm clear now.
Okay, Councilmember Ennis, your light's not on, but your face says I have a question.
I'm just not satisfied with our folks who don't have a lot of disposable income. I am 100% behind the effort to cover our costs.
So,
but I have a real problem with all these escalating charges on top of charges.
Well, we did not change anything for residential.
Matt. That is a policy conversation that does not require staff. So at this point in time, I would respectfully ask for y'all to provide some policy guidance on how to address that concern, because that's way out of staff's.
Thank you, City Manager. So, Councilmember Ennis, part of the discussion needs to be at what point is a hardship? What's the definition of a hardship? Do we want to do that based on an annual income? Do we want to have some type of review process? And if we're going to compensate that, are we compensating that with our general fund? Is there a percentage of money that we want to set aside for those hardship cases? That's the policy side of this. So you have to draw a line, and wherever you draw a line, there's going to be somebody on either side. We don't have to decide that tonight, but that's the kind of things that I think of is a hardship to you and a hardship to me and a hardship to Mr. Peterson. We're likely to come, so we would have to formalize that.
I understand all that. Where I'm going is, don't we need to consider this? Because there are some folks who are just not going to be able to afford this. And to get something done that they need to get done, and they won't be able to do it because of these fees that stack on top of each other.
And I know you know this, but the problem with that is if we waive those fees for a hardship, then you're asking people just above the hardship line to be compensating for that. And that may push them to a hardship line. So we have to either have a pot of money or have a process. It's a really hard question, and it's a very valid concern, but we got to somehow as a council come up with some sort of a definition so that we can provide policy guidelines, and maybe it's a hardship application that, I don't know, that comes to council or what. I'm not sure what I'm not trying to dismiss the question. I'm struggling with how to come up with an answer that's fair and equitable.
I understand that, and I wish that we could have workshopped this alone, these fees, because we have had a workshop on fees before, and I wish we could have workshopped this alone so that we could have vetted all these questions. But it seems like we're under the gun to get these approved because they're an integral part of our budget. So I don't know what the answer to that is outside of tabling this and bringing it back for a workshop.
This agenda item 3D does not say move to put on the 27th agenda, so we could talk about it again on the 27th.
It needs to,
And
it should. My recommendation would be is that we approve these, because if we don't, we're going to miss opportunities for cost recovery for the new process. But we can immediately put a workshop on the council to deal with how do we deal with the hardship piece of this very quickly, so we can begin to address that. And staff can reach out to some of our community support affiliates and put together a list of services that are available to help address the concern of what's the option, because it may or may not come from us. There may be other options out there.
Well, and whoever chooses to make the motion may choose to not put it on the consent agenda so that it definitely gets discussed. And if it is put on the consent agenda, somebody can always pull it. Councilmember Ennis, any other comments? I got two other lights on. You okay? You want to think? Got more to say?
No, ma'am, but it doesn't say it has to be on second reading in the.
That's what I said. It doesn't say that on there, and she's saying it does need to go for a second reading, and
Oh, it
I'm
does.
saying whoever makes the motion can say that they don't want it on consent agenda.
Okay, thank you.
That's a possibility. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
You know, I don't disagree with that, but I think we need to maintain the integrity of the process, and we can certainly do that by taking action tonight and then discuss how we can address those issues of hardship, what kind of format we're going to place that in, whether it's going to be a request for a hardship application. If that's the case, then we can provide them with information relative to help groups or even a self-help determination in there to provide them that information to allow them to move forward. Once they realize that there's some costs that they incurred in doing a voluntary remodeling, then maybe they will change their mind or modify their process so that they lower their costs. But I don't think we need to compromise the integrity of the process in any way, shape, or form based on what-ifs or exceptions.
Councilmember Jackson?
I'm pretty much in agreement with Councilmember Ennis. I think we need to look at it. Perhaps we can move forward with it, but then not have it on consent agenda for the 27th, but we can talk about it and maybe by that time come up with some other solutions, because we do have a significant pocket of citizens that are not going to be able to afford some of these expenses or remodels, or even if they are considered maintenance or whatever. So I would like for us to look at that. I don't want to slow down the process, but we do need to, before we finalize it, I'd like to see us discuss it more.
Thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Rogers?
I just have one more thing I wanted to
Sure.
throw out there. I know that, let's say it is a remodel, and you say they have a remodel permit, they have an electrical permit, they have a plumbing permit, and I agree we need to get our our fees back. I'm just wondering if there's a way to bundle some of those, because some of that you came up with the fees because that's what it's going to take to do the electrical permit, and this is how much money it's going to take to do that. But some of that permit's all done at the same time. I know the inspections are differently, so I don't know if they're doing several. If you're buying a whole basket of stuff, you're going to get so much off of it because it's all done in one process. I don't know. Just curious. I've never worked in planning, so I'm not sure.
So, Matt and team, when we go back, what we need to do is in the permit fee, build in the traditional inspection fee, if we think that it is that's what it is. So now let me finish. So if we get in the permit fee an inspection, and then all that we're adding on to it is a reinspection. So if we have to go back out there, or it takes more than one inspection, then they pay the extra, but we know if we've issued a permit, we have to inspect for it. So when we come back on the 27th, let's be prepared to deal with the bundling question, and if we know it's going to have an inspection, put it in the fee so that it's not the add-ons. We're going to fly Southwest, not American. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, and a suggestion that I would make is maybe look back over the last 6 or 9 months and see if someone has done a small residential remodel and
I have
give
that
us
in
an
my notes.
idea
I'll
of
get you an
what the
average
fees
cost of the
cost.
remodel.
You know, I think that might help put us in perspective. What did the fees cost before and what would they be now?
Yes, ma'am.
That might help put things in perspective for us. Is that agreeable to council? Council, I certainly appreciate the conversation. It is a ton of information. I am interested in a motion, and I will double check that it's not Chapter 14. City Attorney, do I need to have a public hearing? Okay, so we are on, Mr. Jones, are you complete with your presentation?
Yes, ma'am. I'm finished.
All right, we are on item 3D. It is the center of page 2. Consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-25 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Appendix A fee schedule, Section A3.01, General Provisions, Section A3.04, Building Code, Section A3.05, Electricity, Electrical Code, Section A3.06, Plumbing Code, Section A3.07, Mechanical Code, Section A3.15, Swimming Pools, Section A3.16, Moving of Structures, Demolition and Site Work, Section A3.20, Signs, Section A3.21, Streets, Right-of-Ways, and Public Properties, Section A10-03, Subdivision Ordinance, Section A14.01, Zoning, General Provisions, and adding Section A5.10, Fire, Planning, Review, and Inspection Fees, establishing a repealing clause, providing for a severability date, and providing for an effective date. You will note that as it is written, it is not on the consent agenda. So if you want it on the consent agenda, you would need to add that to your motion or not.
Madam Mayor, move to approve and place on the August 27th agenda for a second reading.
I have a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson that it be placed on individual consideration items for August 27th.
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Jackson. Is there any further discussion?
By indicating that, you said items for consideration, so that's not the consent agenda. in other
Correct.
words. Okay, I just want clarification.
I don't believe any of these have been put on the consent agenda.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them
Have they?
have.
Okay. I think they've all been moved for a second reading, but I've not heard consent on any of them.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you're going to have another epic agenda. We're not going to assume this complicated on the consent.
It's consent. That makes sense. Thank you. Some of them say second reading, some of them don't, but they all require a second reading. Okay. Hanging in there. So it's definitely, the motion and the second is for it to be on the August 27th agenda. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Okay, council, we have one item left. It is 8:36.
And he's going to be brief.
Do we need a break? Okay, no break. You're between us and going home, Trey. It's super important. Don't mess up. No pressure.
Oh, my goodness.
Why don't you let Colin
undo
get
that.
you there?
So we're at 3C
3C.
is where we're going.
This is the easiest one, so it won't take long. Very small changes.
That's what they all say.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. Basically, what you have here is a revision to ordinance number 2019-17, which is stormwater drainage ordinance. We're revising just a couple of sections to add some definitions and to make it reflect what's in the actual stormwater drainage design manual. Taking out some definitions, amending the appeal process and the exemptions and exceptions. And if you look in your new packet, all the changes are on your staff report, pages 92 and 93. So I'll go through these really quickly. But you can see the changes that we're making to 16.01-2, which is the definitions, which we talked about. I won't read them all off. We removed the definition for CBA that was in there. The maintenance plan has been revised and added to this ordinance to reflect what's in the manual. Again, 09 erosion control plan was reserved previously. Those were just not added because the definitions and the explanations weren't finished. Since then, Alan has sent those. We've incorporated these changes. It defines the stormwater prevention pollution plan, and then again makes it reference what's in the state law and in our manual. Erosion control plan, it does the exact same thing. One of the main changes here in the 16.01.009 is previously one of our requirements was just that SWIP was approved by the state. It actually comes to the city engineer and he reviews it, which they already did, but now
Just
it's a
clarifying
requirement.
that.
Yes, now it's a
And
requirement.
I noticed on the maintenance, if you go back 2 slides and you don't have to, but the maintenance is also for temporary. And
Yes.
that's a really cool thing, because
Yes.
that means if they've got up their temporary fence and there's a problem, it's their responsibility to replace it, not
That's
ours.
correct. That's
Okay.
absolutely correct.
Question, I mean, you said revised, and I'm seeing maintenance plan was reserved, is that?
It wasn't included in the ordinance from the original passage because the work was, we rushed that one as well. So there was a couple items missing. We went back and found them in the manual and now inserted them in the ordinance. So it's what you adopted in the manual. Now it's being clarified in the ordinance, codified.
The reserve is there?
Yes.
Yes.
We knew we were going to need one.
We knew we were going to need it. That's correct. Again, the easements, they're just to reflect what's in the manual. Here's something that was one of the bigger changes, and if you look at section 16.01.03, which was the exemptions and waivers, originally they went to the ZBA and Zone Board of Adjustments. Now they come to council. And once the decision is made by the DRC, if they don't like the DRC's decision, Development Review Committee, it can actually come to council for the change and appeal.
And so we are putting the jurisdiction of drainage squarely in the hands of council.
And not
since
ZBA.
it gets you elected and unelected, we thought that was the humane thing to do.
We appreciate that very much. But really what that means is the bottom line is, since the city manager's office is a part of the DRC, they're going to have been through all of staff, and you are going to be prepared, and it's going to be,
That's
here
correct.
is applicant with their side of the story and their professional engineers, and here is staff
That's right.
with their side of the story.
And we're saying-
That's the bottom line,
And
right?
what we're saying is if we can't approve it in DRC, we don't have the authority to, and it is a policy decision.
There you go.
Yes, and if you want an exemption to all the rules that you just passed tonight, they've got to come have a conversation
So
with
if
you.
they truly think they have extenuating circumstances,
They
then
come
here
here.
we are, because you guys don't have the authority to grant the extenuating
That's
circumstances.
correct.
So
That's
you may
correct.
even come and say, we would approve it if we could, but y'all won't let us because it's violating the rules and we can't.
That's
Ready,
exactly
go.
what we're going to say, yes.
All right.
So what just happened, because I know I went through it fast, I just pointed out the sections, the changes to the stormwater. Revisions now comply with the manual on these 3 sections. May not even have to go through them again, but the easements were the changes to A and B. Those were added. Truly, I think we touched on the exemptions and the appeals, and that's pretty much all the changes. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
That really
As quick as I could do it,
fast,
yeah.
right?
As quick as I could go.
There was a question from a council member on the, some of the water quality stuff, and I confirmed, and we had a conversation that it's in there as, these are suggestions, and they are not required, and the list is the modified list of normal things we would want people to do.
That's correct. All we did was go back and you were always required to have a stormwater prevention and pollution plan by the state.
Okay,
That's a
I'm
requirement
changing
anyway.
topics on you. Part of the.
Water quality did not change
That's
from what
correct.
you adopted in April.
That's
I just
what I'm
didn't,
looking
what
for.
what I didn't want was the SWIP to be confused with water quality, because it is, but it's not. It really has to do with runoff. from the
I understand
site.
what you're saying,
Yes.
because there's some sediment
They-
that
they
you're taking
overlap a
care of,
touch,
but it's only
yes.
during construction.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Jackson?
Just seeing the changes and the revisions and whatever the reserve part, I was just going to move for approval.
I have a motion to, well, you can't, because this is a presentation and we haven't gotten to the
This is not-
agenda part.
Okay.
So you're
I'm ahead of the game.
You're done
Am I ahead
with
of
your,
time? Yes, I'm complete, yes.
any
thank
other
you.
questions for Trey before we move to the agenda? Good job, Trey. City Attorney, I'm not required to have a public hearing? All right, we're crossing out public hearing. We're on the famous last item, 3C. We're at the top of page 2 on the agenda. Consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-30. Madam Secretary, that's right, ordinance? All righty. City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending Chapter 16, Stormwater Drainage, Section 16.01.002, 16.01.007, 163.01.009, 16.01010, 16.01013, and 16.01015. Are y'all sure about the 163? That seems weird.
It's 16.3.
It's 16.3, okay. See, y'all are checking to see if I was paying attention. By defining stormwater pollution prevention plans and establishing requirements for maintenance plans, erosion control plans, and easements as a part of construction process for stormwater control, giving the City Council the responsibility of approving or disapproving recommendations from the Development Review Committee and the authority to hear appeals regarding the administration of this chapter, and providing for findings of fact, enactment, enforcement, a repealer, and severability, establishing an effective date, proper notice and meeting, and move to include on the August 27th, 2019 agenda for second reading. Councilmember Jackson.
Okay, now I'll make that motion to follow through. It's an action item now.
So is that a motion to approve?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Jackson
Second.
and a second from Councilmember Ennis. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Job. Councilmember Peterson, we're on item 5.
Motion to adjourn.
It is 8:44 and we are adjourned. Round of applause for staff. Outstanding job. Thank you, everyone.